In the quiet, rural corners of America, an untold horror unfolds under the veil of night. It's a recurring nightmare that has haunted farmers for over 50 years, a mystery where the victims are livestock and the perpetrator defies human logic. This is not the work of wolves or coyotes. This is calculated, precise, and utterly bloodless. They call them cattle mutilations. For decades, investigators have been chasing ghosts, yet the evidence points increasingly toward a non-terrestrial solution. Tonight, we peel back the layers of this gruesome enigma, from the unnerving surgical precision to the alarming forensic evidence that suggests we are dealing with a technology far beyond our own, exploring the terrifying possibility that these mutilations are not random acts of cruelty, but part of a global, non-hostile alien agenda. The typical mutilation scene is a study in contradictions. A lifeless animal, often a cow, found intact, yet vital organs have been expertly removed. The cases cluster in areas known for high UFO activity, like the vast San Luis Valley in Colorado. Ranchers like Mike Duran, who discovered one of his cows with the udders and female genitalia cleanly removed, consistently testify that the acts are unlike any natural predator kill. The most chilling aspects of these scenes are universal. Organs like the genitals, eyes, tongues, and ears are surgically removed with uncanny finesse. The animal's blood is entirely drained, yet there is no blood at the crime scene. Crucially, there is a complete absence of evidence. No human footprints, no tire tracks, no signs of struggle, implying the animals were never even on the ground during the procedure. The cuts themselves are the most damning clue. Duran described them as not being made by a knife, but looking like they were cut and cauterized at the same time, clean, like a laser. The sophistication of these cuts is what first broke the earthly paradigm. They are performed with such cellular precision that tissues immediately adjacent to the cut line show no trauma whatsoever, a feat impossible with current human surgical tools, which always leave microscopic cell tearing. This technological signature, coupled with the mysterious nature of the attack, often leads the ranchers themselves to an extraterrestrial conclusion. As Duran stated, upon seeing the scene, his first thought was, "They're back." This initial visceral reaction of the witnesses strongly suggests that the level of precision and the manner of the operation are entirely foreign to our world, hinting at a non-human operative utilizing methods we can only dream of. The mystery transitioned from folklore to forensic science, with the work of individuals like Philip Hoyle, former director of the Animal Pathology Research Unit in the UK. Hoyle spent years investigating these cases, and his findings are arguably the most compelling link to an extraterrestrial hypothesis. He stressed that when examining the wounds under a microscope, one realizes they are not looking at a mere knife wound. Some of the tissue appeared to be unzipped, implying a molecular-level disintegration rather than a cut. The cuts were clean, precise, clinical, and perfectly aligned. He unequivocally stated that the technology used is frankly terrifying and clearly, absolutely clearly, more advanced than anything we currently possess on Earth, suggesting a civilization thousands of years ahead of us. The most shocking evidence came from a substance often found at the wound site, a black, putty-like paste. Analysis revealed this to be degraded hemoglobin, but with a crucial distinction. The red and white corpuscles had been separated using a centrifuge. Hoyle emphasized that this sophisticated process can only be done in a high-tech, controlled laboratory setting. The fact that this specific forensic signature is found on a cow carcass in a remote field utterly invalidates any theory involving earthbound predators or cultists. This finding points directly to a high-level, technologically advanced scientific operation, a kind of biosignature left by the craft's internal environment or procedures. Based on the combination of the sterile cuts and the lack of ground evidence, Hoyle developed a chilling theory about the perpetrator's method of operation. He hypothesized that the entities are using transference beams, essentially anti-gravity beams, to silently levitate the animal off the ground and on board the craft where the surgical procedure is done, before placing it back down. This zero-friction transport system is deemed the only rational explanation for the complete lack of evidence or disturbance surrounding the animal when it is discovered. This hypothesis is further corroborated by hundreds of farmer testimonies reporting strange phenomena coinciding with the mutilations. Bright spheres of light, orbs, and UFOs operating in non-traditional, non-aerodynamic flight patterns, exhibiting speeds and instantaneous directional changes unlike any known human aircraft or helicopter. These sightings are often described as silent, hovering craft operating with a purposeful, stealthy efficiency. If the evidence points to superior technology, the question then becomes why. Hoyle believes the objective is not malevolent, but rather a global surveillance program. He suggests that various alien intelligences have a vested interest in planet Earth and humanity, and they are systematically sampling the environment by removing specific, regenerative tissues and glands from livestock on a global scale. Their primary goal is to monitor the food chain and the environment by collecting genetic materials and tissues, which are then transported off-world for their ultimate purpose, perhaps to monitor the effects of our pollution or disease on Earth's delicate biological systems. Hoyle argues that these entities are not hostile. They genuinely care about our welfare. He views their actions as a meticulous global stewardship of the biosphere, operating in secret to prevent mass panic, because revealing the full extent of this intervention would undoubtedly cause societal collapse. The most curious element of the cattle mutilation phenomenon is not the technology, but its apparent decline in recent years. While high-profile, undeniable cases still surface sporadically, the sheer volume and geographical concentration seen in the 1970s and 1980s have largely diminished. If these acts were the result of a global, systematic extraterrestrial program, why the sudden lull? One major hypothesis within the UFO and mutilation research community, and one that aligns with Philip Hoyle's theory, is that the sampling mission has largely been completed. If the objective was to gather sufficient genetic and tissue samples from the global food chain to establish a baseline of planetary health and monitor the effects of human environmental impact, pollution, pesticides, disease, then the entities may have simply collected enough data. The operation moved from a high-volume data collection phase to a low-volume maintenance or monitoring phase. Essentially, once the initial biological census was complete, the need for dozens of mutilations per year vanished. Furthermore, the decrease might reflect a shift in the alleged alien agenda. If the animal sampling was preparatory to the human breeding program detailed by David Jacobs, perhaps the resources and focus have been redirected entirely. Once the necessary environmental data was correlated with the accelerating human hybridization program, the entities may have pivoted their surveillance efforts away from the fields and more directly towards human abductions and the quiet integration of hybrids into society. The animals provided the necessary biological context. The humans now provide the necessary genetic material and host environment. Therefore, the recent decline in cattle mutilations may not be evidence that the phenomenon was fake, but rather chilling proof that the entities involved are efficient, goal-oriented, and highly successful. They accomplished their mission, gathered their required materials, and have now moved silently onto the next, perhaps far more invasive phase of their complex operation on Earth. The lack of new evidence doesn't signify peace. It might simply mean the surveillance has become so sophisticated and so targeted that we are no longer equipped to detect it. The evidence is complex, frightening, and undeniable. Now we turn the question to you. Do you believe the mutilations are proof of an ongoing alien agenda? Or is there a terrestrial explanation we haven't uncovered? Let us know your theories in the comments below. Your speculation and analysis fuel the search for truth. If you found this investigation compelling, please hit the like button, share this video with fellow truth seekers, and most importantly, subscribe so you don't miss our next deep dive into the unexplained. Don't let the mystery go unsolved. The Antarctic night was a compression of swirling snow and wind. Dr. Elias Vance worked outside the outpost Gamma habitat, lowering a deep penetration sonar scanner onto a patch of ancient ice. The data returned an impossible signature. His internal log recorded the findings. Log entry 58, subject, subglacial anomaly. The readings defy conventional understanding. The size is astronomical, 5 kilometers beneath the ice sheet, and the profile is unnerving. a vast, perfectly circular metallic structure. This is deliberate, non-terrestrial engineering. It does not belong to the ice, the rock, or the history of mankind. The magnitude of the discovery was a cold certainty, an artifact of unimaginable provenance. Vance prepared to retract the scanner, but the environment suddenly fractured. The wind died instantly, replaced by a vacuum of silence. Looking up, the sky, stripped of the aurora, held a single, potent, yellow-white light. It hung motionless. The electronic world immediately collapsed. His compass spun wildly, settling on the ground. His radio went dead after static, and his chronograph flashed random time zones. My brain registered a categorical event breach. This was not a geomagnetic anomaly. This was focused, intelligent interference. Vance felt the deep, biological tremor of the unknown, but his analytical self seized control. The light began a controlled descent, contracting into a tight, focused cone directly above the drill site. The ice beneath his boots began a low internal vibration, causing fine dust particles to rise and shimmer. Vance stopped his retreat. Retreat guarantees nothing but the loss of data. Survival is secondary to documentation. He made a conscious choice. He activated his hardened field camera and audio recorder, directing them toward the mesmerizing light source. The light swelled, changing from focused yellow to a consuming, absolute white. The humming beneath his feet escalated, pressing against his chest. He managed a final, blinding glance upward as the light consumed his vision. The overwhelming intensity rendered the scene void, erasing the boundary between ice and observer. The camera's final frame recorded only the silent, white ignition of his abduction. This was the unavoidable pivot, the moment science was abandoned for the reality of the impossible. Elias Vance was jolted from the void by profound, unnatural cold. His eyes snapped open. He was naked, weightless, suspended in a thick, perfectly clear liquid that coated his skin. The sound of his own breathing was a hollow, frantic gurgle. He was sealed within a massive, flawless cylindrical tube, a monumental test tube of seamless crystalline material. Panic asserted itself. He thrashed, slamming his forearm against the curved wall, generating only weak ripples in the fluid. I am sealed. I am submerged. The material is impossible to breach. The terror was amplified by the silence. The environment outside the liquid was noiseless, yet overwhelmingly present. He forced his vision past the liquid surface. The interior of the vessel was a vast spherical space, sheathed in a matte, silver-white metal, a clinical architecture of absolute curved sterility. Through the translucent wall, he saw them, the Watchers, shadowy figures, unnaturally slender with large, domed craniums. He could only discern the absolute, reflective blackness of their colossal eyes, regarding his plight with impassive scrutiny. He was the sample. Fine, metallic filaments, thinner than hair, extended through the tube wall, adhering precisely to his nerve clusters, his temples, neck, and wrists. They glowed faintly, transmitting data. On a nearby panel, the data was rendered not in human characters, but in a stream of flowing geometric symbols depicting his state, heartbeat, respiration, and the rapid, complex flux of his neural activity. Every signal is quantified. My suffering is merely data. A sophisticated, segmented robotic arm extended from the ceiling, its motion frictionless. It carried a focused orange-red beam emitter, which swept the length of his body. The arm projected a chillingly detailed holographic rendering onto the observation wall, a three-dimensional map of his internal systems. His skeletal frame in cold blue, his organs in faint green, and the dense electrical network of his brain pulsed in violet, a real-time dissection presented without apology. As the arm retreated, Vance managed to twist slightly. He saw an adjacent tube, identical to his own. Suspended within that liquid was another figure, human-sized, completely motionless, skin ethereal, pale white. The realization was a crushing weight in the fluid. This is not a chaotic event. This is a recurring operation. I am not the first, nor am I likely to be the last. I am simply the newest entry in a systematic ledger of biological research. I am a data point in their immense ongoing program. The clinical precision of the facility was the true source of horror. The experiments intensified. The liquid around him darkened, turning a milky, aggressive yellow. Sensory overload became the means of measurement. A wave of searing heat caused involuntary muscular spasms, immediately followed by a profound, draining cold. The geometric symbols outside flashed wildly. He felt a deep, sharp, Invasive pain at the back of his neck, the sensation of a foreign object being inserted or extracted. He thrashed, but the effort was futile, dissolving into weak bubbles. Through a distant, curved viewport, he saw a small, fragile blue marble, Earth. He was far beyond the atmosphere. There is no escape. I am entirely within their dominion, millions of miles from the safety of any known jurisdiction. The isolation was total. A new device descended directly above the crown of his stasis tube. It emitted a rhythmic, hypnotic light, timed perfectly to the violet energy output of his neural mapping. Vance felt a sudden, terrifying shift in his consciousness, a profound, existential detachment. His entire life, his memories, began to stream across his internal vision in a chaotic, reversed rush. They are not merely reading the information. They are cataloging, copying, and perhaps fundamentally altering the source code of my identity. His awareness began to dim. The tube's clinical light faded to a gray haze. The hum of the machinery ceased to register. He was overwhelmed by the conviction that his narrative was over, his consciousness about to be reduced to sterile data in an alien archive. My body is lost. My freedom is gone. Now, my entire history, my very sense of self, is being professionally, clinically erased. The light finally extinguished itself. In the aftermath of the blackout, total silence enveloped Vance. He existed in a void of consciousness. Then, a thin, needle-like spike of light appeared, not the sterile blue of the lab, but a sharp, frigid external light. His awareness accelerated toward this single point, seemingly passing through a non-space. He was recovering, not fragments of memory, but the raw recording of his capture. This is not their playback. This is my mind's final desperate download, retrieving the one moment of absolute truth before the surgical memory excision. The image stabilized, the small, insignificant research habitat, the vast, menacing sky, and his own figure standing alone on the ice. He understood that he was being given a final, unedited view of the event that brought him to the sterile tube. From his recovered memory camera perspective, the scene achieved terrifying clarity. The dark, seamless hull of the teardrop-shaped vessel was suspended above the clouds, encircled by a potent corona of golden light. He saw his tiny silhouette on the white expanse, looking upward. Without warning, a massive, focused column of pure golden energy erupted from the vessel's underside, striking the ice precisely at his location. The force was palpable, even in memory. Scientific instruments, ice shards, and compacted snow were caught in the field, spiraling upward in a chaotic vortex. His body was immediately seized and lifted, pulled vertically, trapped within the center of the brilliant golden cylinder. He was reduced to a small dark form ascending rapidly into the craft's dark underbelly. The sound was a low, deep, visceral rumble that eclipsed his own frantic heartbeat. In the blinding instant before the light consumed him entirely, the certainty was absolute. This is the mechanism, the precise, overwhelming force that erased my reality and transported me to the lab. This golden beam is the clean, efficient tool of my abduction. This raw, terrifying image was the final, definitive data point delivered to his mind. The golden light achieved maximum intensity, a solid, white detonation, and then, abruptly, vanished. Vance found himself lying on his back, gasping on the icy surface. The sky was a non-committal gray. Beside him, pressed into the ancient ice, was a faint, geometric circle, the ghostly imprint of the vessel's landing field. He sat up, his head throbbing. Everything between the moment he raised his camera and the moment he woke up was gone, a successful excision of memory. He pulled off his glove and instinctively rubbed the nape of his neck. His fingers located a small circular scar at the base of his skull, a fresh, geometric incision. He forced a logical, rational conclusion. Hypoxia. Severe hypothermia. I must have simply collapsed and drifted into unconsciousness. Nothing more. Yet the final, persistent thought remained. I do not recall the events that transpired. But in the quiet moments between wakefulness and sleep, the terrifying pull of a brilliant golden light often returns, and I carry the certainty of having been pulled, however briefly, from the surface of this earth. Welcome to the void. Tonight, we're not just discussing a single witness sighting. We are diving into a case so rich in corroboration, so bizarre in its details, that it remains a cornerstone of ufology nearly 5 decades later. His name was Filiberto Cardenas, a Cuban immigrant living in Miami, Florida, in 1979. What happened to him on that quiet January night didn't just change his life. It revealed a terrifying, methodical depth to the alien presence on Earth. This is not a typical lights in the sky story. This case has multiple independent eyewitnesses confirming the initial event. It involves an object left behind as physical evidence. Repeated hypnotic regression sessions across different specialists validated it. But most terrifyingly, Filiberto returned with 108 unexplained marks etched onto his body, and a vivid, consistent memory of a being on a golden throne who spoke to him in perfect Spanish from a hidden subterranean base. Forget the cliches. This is the Cardenas abduction, and here's what the investigators uncovered. The date was late January 1979. Filiberto Cardenas was driving with 3 friends in a remote, quiet area outside Miami. They were engaged in a typical evening, unaware they were about to become unwilling participants in one of history's most documented close encounters of the fourth kind. Suddenly, the vehicle died, not gradually but instantly. This classic electromagnetic effect, EM effect, is often reported in UFO encounters, indicating a sophisticated technological presence overwhelming terrestrial electronics. As the car stalled, a massive, silent, disc-shaped craft descended slowly nearby, casting an eerie, focused glow on the surrounding area. According to the witnesses, Cardenas was immediately struck by a powerful, invisible energy. He was rendered instantly paralyzed, unable to move, speak, or resist. He was then, against all physics, levitated, slowly and silently lifted into the belly of the immense ship. His 3 friends, witnessing this impossible, terrifying scene, fled the location in sheer terror, becoming the first crucial piece of external corroboration. Crucially, this event didn't happen in isolation. Reports later surfaced suggesting that air traffic control personnel at a nearby airport also observed an unidentified flying object exhibiting unusual speed and maneuvers in the vicinity at the exact time of the abduction. This multiple source confirmation, linking ground witnesses to military or official observation, elevated the Cardenas case from a single sensational claim to a documented investigation. Inside the craft, the terrifying medical procedure began. Filiberto found himself in a large, sterile room, surrounded by the classic gray entities. He described them as short, approximately 4 feet tall, with large black eyes and smooth grayish skin. These grays subjected him to a full, invasive physical examination, utilizing strange small tools and focused lights. The examination was harrowing, but the most compelling and unique proof he carried back was physical. 108 small, perfectly circular marks etched across various parts of his body. These were not scars from old injuries. They were fresh, consistent, and meticulously placed. Investigators later photographed and documented these marks. What were they? Puncture wounds? Micro burns from advanced sensor devices? Regardless, the precise number 108 strongly suggests a methodical, deliberate process, a scientific tally or diagnostic procedure. Cardenas returned with a physical receipt, a quantified injury that dramatically separates his story from typical abduction narratives. The medical examination was merely the prerequisite. The core purpose of the abduction was far grander, and it took place not on the ship, but in a different, hidden location. Cardenas later recalled being transported to a massive underground or undersea base, a structure described as a huge, technological cavern, giving the impression of a vast, naturally occurring underground chamber. Here he encountered an entity unlike the short, silent grays. This was the chief, the commanding presence. This being was tall, standing between 6 and 7 feet, majestic and uniquely intimidating. He wore a long, flowing dark yellow or gold cape and sat upon a large, ornate throne. He was the master. This detail of a high-ranking human-like figure is relatively rare and highly significant, suggesting a hierarchical structure within the alien operation. But the biggest shock came when the entity began to speak. He communicated not just telepathically, but verbally, in perfect, flowing Spanish. This suggested an ancient intimacy with human culture and language, implying they had been observing and operating on Earth for a very long time. The chief delivered a solemn and direct warning. Humanity was on a path to self-destruction. Through pollution, continuous warfare, and the proliferation of nuclear weapons, Earth was jeopardizing its own future. He stated that the alien program was a genetic preservation effort, They were methodically collecting and studying samples to ensure the survival of the human species, should we ultimately fail to save ourselves. This aligns the Cardenas case with the controversial but well-documented theory of a widespread hybridization or genetic monitoring program. Before Cardenas was returned, the chief bestowed upon him a gift and a concrete piece of evidence: a small metallic ring inscribed with alien symbols, a script unknown to any human language. This object became the third piece of physical evidence, alongside the 108 marks. While laboratory tests on the ring's material and potential radioactivity were inconclusive in proving its extraterrestrial origin, the foreign symbols cemented the reality of the encounter for Cardenas and his supporters. The story did not end with Filiberto's return. Weeks later, he received a powerful telepathic message. They wanted him back, but this time, he was instructed to bring his wife, Margarita Cardenas. The second abduction, involving Margarita, provided the final, crucial element of corroboration. The investigation was primarily conducted by respected ufologist Virgilio Sanchez Osejo. Understanding the limitations of conscious memory, both Filiberto and Margarita underwent multiple sessions of hypnotic regression with different specialists. The results were astonishing. Under deep hypnosis, both Filiberto and Margarita recounted their experiences: the paralysis, the graze, the chief, the subterranean base, with unwavering consistency across all sessions. Skeptics often dismiss regression therapy, but in the Cardenas case, the level of complex, consistent detail, especially regarding the specific count of the 108 marks and the chief's unique appearance and command of Spanish, makes pure fabrication highly improbable. This convinced many professional researchers that they were dealing with genuine, though suppressed, memories of a traumatic shared experience. The Filiberto Cardenas case remains a highly detailed and heavily corroborated file. It is solidified by a convergence of evidence: multiple eyewitness accounts at the scene and the airport, physical marks, the 108 count on Cardenas's body, the unusual metallic ring, and the consistent hypnotic testimonies of two family members. This case leaves us with profound questions. Were the 108 marks a biological diagnostic receipt? Was the entity on the throne truly a powerful figure in an alien genetic preservation program? And what does it mean that an advanced being, operating from a hidden base, was fluent in our languages? The Cardenas family sacrificed their privacy and endured scrutiny to share this terrifying truth. Their legacy is a reminder that the phenomenon of alien abduction is not just about lights in the sky. It's about a methodical, intelligent, and ongoing interaction with humanity. Do you believe the 108 marks were definitive proof of a foreign diagnostic device? Or do you think the consistency of the stories was simply a case of shared psychological trauma? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Imagine a job where silence isn't comforting, it's crushing, where the air feels so heavy it presses against your eardrums. You stand completely alone across endless miles of empty space, with nothing but the wind whining through metal cables and the faint cloud of your own breath hanging in the cold in front of your face. Today, we're stepping straight into the heart of that silence, into the hidden secrets of the Copper Ridge Resort. The Copper Ridge Resort, perched high in the Colorado Rockies at 11,000 feet, was a study in isolated cold. This was the domain of the graveyard shift, and for 6 years, Callum Rafferty, a 52-year-old lift operator with a reputation for routine, had been its sole guardian. It was February 16th. At 12:05 a.m., Callum secured himself into the maintenance cabin for his methodical 40-minute inspection round. His job was simple: check the cables, pylons, and the dozens of empty passenger cabins hanging motionless on the line. The silence was absolute, broken only by the auxiliary motor's hum and the metallic clack of the wheels. Up here, he felt closer to the blinding stars above than to the world below. Callum was approaching the third pylon, Pylon 3, when the rhythm broke. His headlamp swept across the suspended passenger cabins ahead. His eyes immediately locked onto a visual impossibility. Above cabin 18, a soft, brilliant, white-blue light was hovering, silent, stationary, and approximately 30 feet above the empty car. It was unlike any resort or aircraft system. The phenomenon was not singular. There were 3 more identical lights, one above cabin 22, another over cabin 25, and a fourth positioned precisely over cabin 29. 4 isolated passenger cabins, each marked by a silent sphere of energy. He pulled out his radio, his heart beginning a heavy thud. "Marcus, this is Callum. 4 distinct lights, high intensity, above the line near pylon 3. Check thermal or CCTV." Marcus, the night security guard at the base, reported, "Negative, Callum. All feeds are green. Clear night." Callum's cabin was now nearly adjacent to cabin 18, East Car. Inside the glass, a heavy, opaque layer of thick white frost covered the interior of the windows. Inside, it was an impossible anomaly. The cabin was sealed. This internal flash freeze defied logic. He sped up, moving to cabin 22. The light and the internal frost were identical. "Marcus, get Ava on the line. This is beyond thermal. The inside of these cabins, they're covered in frost, like a rapid internal flash freeze." Ava Riker, the head of security, confirmed Marcus's report. Nothing on the cameras. She suggested reflection or a trick of the light. Callum rejected it. "Ava, this is pylon 3 at 11,000 feet. What is freezing the inside of the glass?" He reached pylon 2 and looked back. His breath hitched in his throat. They were gone. The 4 white-blue lights were extinguished, vanished. The cabins themselves appeared perfectly normal. The bizarre internal frost had disappeared without a trace. The entire phenomenon had been wiped clean in the span of perhaps 90 seconds. "Ova," he radioed, his voice tight. "Scratch that. The lights are gone, and the cabins are clear. They just dissolved." Ava told him to finish his inspection and log the disturbance. Callum knew his eyes had not deceived him. The disturbance was real, even if the recording devices failed to capture it. Callum reached the summit station, his mind still reeling from the pylon 3 event. He stepped out onto the steel deck, exposed to the raw mountain night, and saw the second, overwhelming anomaly. Floating 100 feet off the ground silently was an object of enormous size. It was long and cylindrical, perfectly cigar-shaped, at least 40 feet in length. It glowed with the same intense white-blue light as the spheres, but this light was subdued, a deep, self-contained pulse that seemed to absorb sound. The wind was completely dead. The quiet was absolute, a pressure vacuum that made his ears pop. Callum stood frozen, feeling an overriding sense of absolute, clinical inspection. The massive, silent craft simply hovered, dominating the atmosphere. He knew he was being studied, observed, and categorized, a single insect beneath a microscope. Then, with an impossible acceleration that defied physics, the cigar-shaped object did not move so much as it vanished. It became a single, brief streak of white-blue light, an arc of energy that shot vertically into the star-packed sky and was gone. Shaking, Callum radioed Ava and began the descent. He checked the time, 1:12 a.m. The ride should have taken 40 minutes. Halfway down, the magnitude of the event struck him. Every single passenger cabin, all 42 of them, were now uniformly covered in the same thick internal frost he had seen earlier. A silent, frozen fleet gliding down the mountain. He radioed Marcus. "You need to be at the base station. All 42 cabins are frosted inside." He accelerated the cabin, needing to get off the mountain. He pulled into the dock at 1:47 a.m. Marcus was waiting. "Callum, what took you so long? You were due back at 1:12 a.m. The system logged a downtime anomaly of 35 minutes. Callum stared, bewildered. The motor log confirmed it, stationary from 1:12 a.m. to 1:47 a.m. 35 minutes had vanished from his life. He pointed to the approaching cabins. "Marcus, look at the frost inside." Marcus squinted. "They're empty. Call. Just normal frost on the outside." Callum turned back to the closest car. The thick, impossible internal frost that had covered the entire fleet moments ago was gone. The slate was wiped clean. Callum was the only witness. In those 35 missing minutes, the watchers had sampled every passenger cabin, collecting a massive atmospheric sample, and meticulously erased all evidence just before his arrival. Callum and Ava Riker eventually shared their combined data. Ava, deeply disturbed by the systematic failure of the CCTV and the inexplicable time loss, had a rare moment of professional vulnerability, admitting that something outside the known resort operations had occurred. She privately noted a brief, unexplained white-blue flash in one of the high-altitude cameras, too quick and too distorted to classify, but enough to unsettle her. A week later, the encounter escalated. Callum was again on the gondola when the cabin motor abruptly failed, a non-standard malfunction. Then the cabin felt a distinct, powerful shift. It was lifted clean off the gondola cable by an unseen force. Panic finally set in. He watched the mountain drop away beneath him as his cabin was gently transported toward the summit. Then the world dissolved into a bright light, and when his vision cleared, he was no longer in the cabin. He was inside a vast, silent structure, the cigar-shaped craft he had seen, perhaps, or a chamber within it. The chamber was lit by the same gentle white-blue pulse. In the center of the room stood an entity. It was about 5 feet tall, with smooth, pale gray-white skin and a disproportionately large head. Its eyes were massive, black and almond-shaped, utterly devoid of any recognizable emotion, yet communicating a sense of profound age and intelligence. This was not a monster. It was a pure intellect. The entity raised a 3-fingered hand and touched Callum's temple. Instantly, knowledge flooded his mind, a rapid, non-verbal stream of pure understanding. He realized the 4 lights were observation drones for rapid molecular sampling. The internal frost was the collection mechanism, freezing trace data from every single human who had ridden the lift that day. This was a massive population sample, gathered and meticulously wiped clean during the 35 minutes of lost time. The beings were watchers, observers, and students of humanity, patiently observing a species evolving. Most profoundly, he grasped nonlinear time perception. The missing time wasn't stolen. His consciousness had momentarily slipped free of human linear reality. For the watchers, time was fluid, elastic, and abundant. He was returned to his cabin with a silent jolt, leaving him only with a small, circular scar on his forearm, the physical cost of seeing. Callum Rafferty and Ava Riker were changed. They knew the mountains of Colorado were a vast, high-altitude laboratory, and they had been observed. They learned to live with the truth. The Watchers are ancient, patient, and exist in a state of non-linear time, simply observing a species on the cusp of evolution. The truth is more unsettling than simple abduction. The mountains are watching, and humanity is being patiently observed, learning to swim through time instead of drown in it. Pay attention to your clocks. Notice when your moments feel elastic. These are signs that your consciousness is transitioning. If you've made it this far, thank you for watching. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next deep dive into the unexplained. Leave a comment below. What is your theory on nonlinear time, and where are you watching from tonight? Let's discuss. The air in the main cryogenic wing of the secret Nevada facility, known only by its unsettling nickname, Area 51, was sterile, vast, and perpetually cold. Engineer Daniel Thorne, an expert in exotic materials, had spent months trying to crack the secrets of failed Earth prototypes. He was brilliant, cynical, and utterly drained by the silence of his work. His current task, trying to reinforce the brittle wings of the U-2 reconnaissance plane, felt tedious and increasingly futile. On the 8th of July, 1947, that silence was shattered. Colonel Richard Hayes, the project's director, entered the lab, his face a mask of calculated gravity. He ordered Thorne to drop his current work, announcing that he would no longer be focusing on U-2 wing failure. Hayes revealed that an highly irregular transmission had been received hours ago, Code Mogul 7, signaling a retrieval, not of debris, but of proof. Hayes slid a grainy photograph across the table, showing a massive, twisted metallic hull partially buried in dry dirt. But the colonel produced a second, unsettling image, a small, pale body laid on a military tarp. The entity possessed a grotesquely oversized, dome-shaped head and 2 immense jet-black, almond-shaped eyes that seemed to absorb the camera flash. Hayes confirmed the object was extraterrestrial, having gone down near Roswell, New Mexico, with the official cover story being a mere weather balloon. Thorne and Dr. Mark Jensen were immediately assigned to secure the assets, emphasizing the need for both the technology and the life they had recovered. Arriving at the Roswell Ranch before dawn, Daniel and Dr. Mark Jensen were immediately struck by the scene. The military operation was immense, surrounding a scorching trench in the middle of a barren field. The earth wasn't merely burned. The intense, Localized heat had instantly vitrified the ground, turning the soil into dark, smooth glass. Daniel quickly secured fragments of the hull. The alloy was non-ferrous, incredibly lightweight, and possessed a bewildering structural memory, springing back into shape after any attempts to deform it. Jensen, focused on the mission, led the way into the cramped, dark interior of the twisted hull. The air inside was heavy, with the smell of metallic dust and something faintly organic. The walls of the ship seemed to be alive, covered in pulsing, bioluminescent veins. The moment they stepped across the threshold, they entered an alien domain, leaving the world they knew behind. Jensen noted from the thermal scan that the deceased entity was in the aft compartment, confirming the priority was to focus on the survivor first. As Jensen swept the main console, a horrific sound, a high-pitched screech, reverberated through the metal casing. A small, multi-limbed creature, later dubbed the Scuttler, sprung from the shadows. It moved with terrifying speed, immediately launching itself onto Mark's back, its sharp, flexible, dark blue tentacles wrapping tightly around his head and face. Daniel screamed his colleague's name. Ignoring his sidearm, he grabbed the most effective weapon he had, the emergency biocidal emitter. It was a portable device designed for rapid sterilization, capable of emitting a blinding white-blue beam of intense UV light. He slammed the trigger. The high-intensity UV beam struck the Scuttler. The creature shrieked, its skin smoking slightly and its tentacles instantly retracted. With a final piercing cry, it recoiled from the light, the one thing it seemed to fear, and disappeared back into the hull's depths. Mark was unconscious, but alive. The priority shifted. They secured the primary entity, Subject X, and the technology. The recovery was complete, but Daniel now knew there was an active, aggressive threat. Back beneath the desert in Area 51, the core team began the grueling work of analyzing the alien anatomy of Subject X. This was not the sterile, detached science of a university. It was a brutal, meticulous invasion of a foreign body. Daniel felt the cold irony. Mark had been violated by the aggression of the Scuttler, and now Daniel was performing a calculated, clinical violation on the deceased specimen, mirroring that terror. Daniel, in charge of documenting the biomechanical structure, watched as the military surgeon made the first incision. Instead of blood, a thick, coppery blue fluid oozed out, a copper-based carrier suggesting an atmosphere and diet vastly different from Earth's. The creature's skin, thin and remarkably durable, seemed to be part of its sensory input. The internal structure was terrifyingly optimized. The skeletal structure was the first major breakthrough. Laser scans revealed bones that were porous and lightweight, yet structurally capable of withstanding G-forces that would be instantly fatal to humans. The muscles were composed of specialized fibers, hinting at immense strength and quickness. They found no traditional respiratory or digestive systems, but instead a complex network of capillary-like vessels and internal sacs. Crucially, the team examined the torso. They found subtle, vestigial ridges running down the spine and rib cage, leading to 4 retractable sensory tubules, not true tentacles, but highly flexible, fine organic filaments. Daniel speculated they were used for environmental probing or short-range physical communication, echoing the lethal grasp of the Scuttler. Every finding was a dead end for conventional biology, forcing the team to reevaluate every assumption. The more they cut, the more Daniel felt Subject X was simply waiting for them to finish, an unsettling sense of presence lingering over the cold table. Daniel, however, remained transfixed by the creature's head. When they carefully opened the immense skull, the neural tissue proved to be incredibly dense and convoluted. The most astonishing discovery lay beneath the black, almond-shaped eyes, a crystalline matrix. Daniel, after adjusting his microscope, concluded that the crystalline matrix was far more than an eye. It was a sensory device designed to perceive the entire electromagnetic spectrum. He realized they weren't just observing light. The entity perceived radio waves, magnetic fields, perhaps even temporal distortions. Thorne summarized his findings to the team. They were dissecting a sentient communications array, confirming the body itself was the propulsion command center. The team's final focus shifted to the subtle, almost invisible technology embedded in the creature's limbs. Tiny microelectronic circuits were directly integrated into the bone structure. Months passed, and the urgency of the project began to wear down the team. Daniel became obsessed, staying up late trying to map the signals of the microcircuits embedded in Subject X's lower leg, which was isolated and propped up on the autopsy table. The physical exhaustion and mental strain were reaching critical mass as he attempted to bridge the final gap between species. On a late December night, Daniel was alone. He connected the leg bone to an isolation power source and activated his laser probe, sending a minimal charge into a crystal-like circuit in the tibia. The circuit began to pulse with a faint, deep hum. As Daniel leaned in to observe the spectral analyzer, the isolation unit spiked wildly. The energy inside the bone surged, and the circuit's hum intensified. Without warning, a thin, brilliant beam of pulsing, emerald green light erupted from the exposed circuit. It was silent, terrifyingly focused, and it swept rapidly across Daniel's chest before instantly shutting down. Daniel felt two sensations simultaneously: a sharp, cold electric shock that felt like being struck by lightning, followed by an intense, blistering, searing pain where the beam touched his skin, a paradoxical freezing burn. He stumbled, falling heavily against a counter, his breath hitched in his throat. The fabric of his jumpsuit was scorched, and beneath it, a bright green stripe marred his skin, raw and livid. Subject X was inert, but the damage was done. The experiment had turned on the primary researcher. The incident shook the project to its core. Colonel Hayes swiftly deemed it an equipment malfunction. The following day, Hayes declared the experiment over, his voice cold and final. He ordered that Project Firebrand be suspended and the remains returned to cryogenic storage. Hayes revoked Thorne's clearance and placed him on indefinite leave, citing that his exposure to the unknown energy signature posed an unacceptable risk. Daniel knew he was being contained, a threat to the secret, not saved. Daniel stood firm, his hand touching the fresh bandage covering the green stripe. He challenged the colonel, stating that the light was not a malfunction, but a directed discharge, a failsafe. Thorne accused Hayes of halting the project not to protect him, but because the colonel realized the light was likely a message and Daniel was now the antenna. Hayes remained unmoved, giving his final order. Thorne's interpretation was irrelevant, and he was to report immediately for debriefing and containment. The secret was locked away, and Daniel was now the primary security breach. Confined to an isolated room, Daniel suffered constant, pounding headaches. He closed his eyes, and the pain transformed into a rhythmic thump, 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 a frequency he didn't hear with his ears, but perceived inside his mind. Then came the images, distant, pale suns, and an overwhelming sense of cosmic displacement. The green stripe on his chest began to itch, a constant, irritating reminder. Daniel Thorne knew the truth. The entity was inert, but the experiment was not over. The light had passed through him, and now he was a wounded, unwilling, and potentially broadcasting part of Project Firebrand. He was the ultimate horrifying secret of Area 51. That is the story of Daniel Thorne, the man who dared to look into the universe's secret only to be consumed by it. We are left to wonder, was that emerald green beam merely a random electrical discharge? Or was it a deliberate action, Subject X's final defense, turning the interrogator into an unwilling host? What is certain is that Daniel became a part of the very thing he sought to decode. He is not just imprisoned within Area 51, but trapped inside his own body, constantly broadcasting strange frequencies from that green scar. What do you believe? What conspiracy theory resonates most with you? Is Daniel Thorne still out there, unwittingly sending out the universe's secrets? Let us know your thoughts in the comments section below. Don't forget to like and share if you are also obsessed with the world's greatest mysteries. Subscribe to Alien X Base for more stories on Project Firebrand and other classified files. There is a very specific time when Route 54 becomes lethal, 2:11 a.m. If your radio cuts out, your GPS dies, and your phone connects to 911 by itself, don't bother hitting the brakes. They've already found you. If that unsettled you, wait until you hear what happened at exactly 2:11 a.m. Leona Ward was a 911 operator in the quiet, isolated town of Santa Rosa, New Mexico. The town's official population stood at 2,744, a figure that felt generous on most days. For 12 years, Ward had mastered the familiar, often comforting rhythm of the desert and the deep silence of the graveyard shift. She recognized the voices of the local farmers, the teenagers pulling harmless pranks, and the lonely elderly residents seeking reassurance. She knew her routine, her town, and her job. Santa Rosa existed primarily as a necessary pit stop on Route 54, the kind of place travelers only glanced at. They would fill their gas tanks, grab beef jerky and a Coke, use the facilities at the Love's truck stop, and then immediately vanish back onto that endless ribbon of black highway. Route 54 was a north-south artery cutting through the desolate desert, linking Tucumcari to the north with Alamogordo to the south. Most of the territory it traversed was empty land, stunningly beautiful in the harsh light of dawn, yet utterly devoid of human presence, and profoundly lonely. Ward insisted she wasn't crazy, despite questioning her own sanity countless times. She was compelled to recount everything that had happened, detailing the terrifying, precise pattern that began exactly at 2:11 a.m. The beginning of the nightmare was the transition from Thursday night to Friday morning, March 14, 2019. Ward was seated at her console, anticipating the usual quiet inertia of the early morning hours. At precisely 2:11 a.m., her headset exploded with sound. It wasn't the sound of a bad signal or typical cell interference. It was a dense, heavy, unnatural static, a sound so saturated it felt physically palpable, as though the caller was trapped beneath tons of water or broadcasting from a distant, vibrating star. The sheer wrongness of the sound sent a shiver down her spine, raising the hairs on her arms. Piercing this sonic wall was the desperate, trembling voice of a young man, Michael Valdez. He claimed he was driving his gray 2015 Honda Civic on Route 54 and was being pursued by lights in the sky. The terror in his voice was not manufactured, it was raw, primal fear. Valdez reported a complete systems failure. His radio, GPS, and cell phone were dead, yet somehow, miraculously, the 911 line had connected. He sounded like a man drowning in technological isolation. The data screen offered no comfort. Ward's console remained stubbornly blank. No coordinates, no tower triangulation, no incoming log nothing to anchor the call in reality. She could hear his panicked breathing, the frantic details of his vehicle, and his increasing desperation. He described seeing shapes within the pulsing light and screamed for immediate help before the line instantly went dead. There was no fading, no clicking, just an instantaneous, complete severance of the connection. Ward dispatched Officer Ruben Marquez. While waiting, she checked her logs. The horrifying reality sunk in. Her system showed no record of the call ever being placed. The only remnant was an automated recording file that, chillingly, was exactly 8 seconds long and contained nothing but the heavy, underwater static. The 4 minutes of desperate conversation she had just experienced had simply been erased from the system's memory. At 2:34 a.m., Marquez reported back. He had found no sign of the Honda Civic. The highway was desolate, just as it usually was at that hour. The final, unsettling confirmation arrived hours later from the Albuquerque police. Michael Valdez was safely home, having been asleep since midnight. His gray Civic was cold and dusty, confirmed not to have been driven for days. Valdez had been at his residence, yet Ward knew with absolute certainty that she had heard a more perfect echo of him screaming into the void on Route 54. Officer Marquez later confided in Ward. Though he initially dismissed it as an atmospheric anomaly, what he saw at 02:45 a.m. near mile marker 290 was impossible. He described an intensely bright white light hovering miles off the highway. It did not drift or accelerate. It abruptly teleported a significant distance south. Then, with an acceleration that defied all known physics, faster than any fighter jet or space shuttle launch, it shot straight up into the black sky and vanished. Marquez, a man whose professional credibility was everything, was visibly shaken by the impossibility of the sighting. The silence that followed the Valdez incident lasted 3 weeks, but for Ward, it was merely an anticipation. The dread became reality on April 4th at exactly 02:11 a.m. The headset erupted with the exact same, uniquely terrifying dense static. This time, the panicked voice belonged to Sarah Baker. She was also on Route 54, and her terror was fueled by recognition. She mentioned seeing the news story about the other people, indicating the phenomenon was already known in hushed rumors or local reports. Sarah described a massive object hovering directly above her blue Ford Escape. The object was enormous, not a plane, emitting pulsing red and white lights. She detailed a visceral sensory assault, a deep, powerful humming sound that didn't just rattle the car, but vibrated through her body, causing excruciating pain in her teeth and bones. It was a physical violation transmitted through sound. She then whispered that she saw something opening up beneath the object, revealing a blinding white light, and within that light, dark shapes, too tall, too thin, confirming her deepest fear. They can't be human. The line cut out instantly. The outcome was identical. Sarah Baker was later confirmed to be safe at home in Las Cruces, her vehicle in her garage, having never left. The call log remained blank, and the recording was 8 seconds of static. The pattern was sealed. In the following months, their 02:11 a.m. calls continued. Ward logged them mentally, knowing her system wouldn't retain the evidence. The victims were found safe at home, yet their cars were discovered abandoned on Route 54. Ward knew these people had been subjected to something traumatic and invasive. They were safe, but deeply tampered with. The authorities began to focus on the vehicles themselves. The most chilling commonality was the ritualistic evidence left behind. The abandoned cars were always found centered and perfectly framed within a perfect triangular shape, formed by 3 large, circular, thermal burn marks etched into the asphalt. These scorch marks were meticulously spaced approximately 47 feet, about 14 meters apart. Forensic analysis confirmed the pavement beneath the car was still warm, indicating the powerful thermal energy had been focused and released just moments before the car was left behind. This geometric precision ruled out natural phenomena or any conventional explanation. It suggested a controlled, measured operation of harvest, a retrieval, or a signal. By December 2025, 2 years after the initial incident, the pattern was impossible to ignore. Leona Ward was no longer a lone operator dealing with an anomaly. She was the central, critical component of a joint task force comprising the FBI and the New Mexico State Police. Her dispatch office was now a field command post, equipped with specialized surveillance and recording devices. The mission was clear: intercept the next event and secure evidence. The tension in the office was almost unbearable. Tonight is Saturday, December 6th, 2025. The clock shows 2:08 a.m. Only 3 agonizing minutes remain until the expected time of contact. FBI agents are stationed silently in the adjacent room, monitoring multiple feeds. Recording devices are active and being double-checked. A fully prepared response team is standing by directly on Route 54, strategically positioned and ready to move. Ward's hand is firmly on her headset, her notebook open and her pen poised. She had stopped feeling fear long ago. Now, there was only determination. In 3 minutes, Ward will find out if all their preparation is enough. She is the nexus point, the only reliable constant in the phenomenon. The truth they seek is about what has been taking people off the highway, what has been utilizing their 911 dispatchers as a means of communication, and what has been deliberately leaving those perfect triangular burn marks a signature in the desert. The clock reads 029. The entire fate of understanding this phenomenon rests on the next 120 seconds. Ward concludes her account with the same chilling professional warning she issues to the task force. Route 54 between Santa Rosa and Vaughn is a kill zone at 2:11 a.m. If you are there and your GPS fails, your radio cuts to static, and your phone connects to only one number, 911. We will hear you. We will document your call. We will send help as fast as we can, but the question remains, are we ready for what happens next? This testimony you are listening is my attempt to bring the truth of Route 54 out into the light, and I need your help to keep it visible. If you find this information compelling, if you believe this phenomenon needs to be investigated further, please hit that subscribe button, leave a thumbs up, and share your theories in the comments below. Your support ensures this message and the patterns we uncover can't be easily silenced. Grant McCarthy thought he understood the Alaskan sky. Then the aurora stopped behaving like the aurora. A pale band froze rigid in midair, and inside it a perfect white line appeared, thin, steady, and too precise to be natural. In the same moment, the Twin Otter's radios fell into absolute silence. Digital systems began lying, and the shape in the sky started moving as if it could read the aircraft. This is not a story about chasing UFOs. It is about a repeating pattern that interacts with an aircraft like a controlled experiment. Communications cut out without static. Digital avionics drift into absurd errors, while analog instruments remain steady. A geometric form appears inside the aurora, rotates with mechanical smoothness, and then begins to match the plane's movement with unnerving precision. Grant McCarthy, 41, was trained to trust procedure, instruments, and weather models. His co-pilot, Renee Voss, carried the same discipline. Their route from Fairbanks to Barrow was familiar, remote, and usually uneventful. What happened on two separate flights suggested something else lived in that corridor, something capable of touching a machine in midair and leaving physical proof behind. Early February, the Twin Otter lifted from Fairbanks and flew north without issue for hours. Then the Aurora formed ahead and stopped behaving like the Aurora. A long east-west band of light froze rigid in mid-motion. Inside that frozen curtain, a single white line appeared, razor straight, pencil thin, bright enough to force a squint. It held perfectly still, too precise to feel natural. The cockpit failed in a way that felt selective. Radios dropped into absolute silence, primary and backup, with no static. GPS flickered and began reporting impossible jumps, altitude numbers spiking and collapsing, while analog dials stayed calm. Ahead, the white line rotated with mechanical smoothness, tilted slightly, corrected, then appeared closer in sudden steps, as if its distance updated between blinks. It split into three identical lines and arranged into a perfect triangle, point up, centered in the forward view. When Grant altered heading, the triangle rotated to stay aligned with the nose. When he adjusted altitude, it matched the change with exact timing. It was tracking. A harsh burst of static snapped through the headset, and a monotone male voice issued a directive to maintain heading and not deviate. The triangle flared once in intense white and vanished. The Aurora resumed normal motion. Radios returned, GPS stabilized. Yet the aircraft recorded a communications loss the ground logs did not acknowledge. After landing at Barrow, the proof was on the airframe. Thick frost coated both wings, far heavier than expected, and a faint scorched discoloration marked the nose, which stayed warm long after shutdown. The official inspection found no shorts, no clear damage, no mechanical explanation. On paper, it became an unexplained malfunction with possible Aurora interference. In the cockpit, it remained something else. Grant could not ignore how selective it had been. Radio silence without noise, digital lies without analog failure, geometry that behaved like a guided instrument rather than atmospheric light. In early March, Grant and Renee flew the same corridor again with no passengers. A single white point appeared ahead, then blinked out. The radio cracked once, and the same monotone voice returned, issuing a calm directive that tried to steer them by command rather than by control tower procedure. The temperature in the cockpit dropped rapidly. Frost crept along the windshield edges. GPS flickered. The white point returned as a line, then divided into three, forming the triangle again as the Aurora seemed to fade away behind it. The triangle held its position relative to the aircraft like a lock-on symbol, matching heading and altitude changes with exact timing. Then the aircraft's behavior shifted from abnormal to impossible. It dipped hard, then surged into a steep climb driven by full power without pilot input. The yoke locked. At 14,200 feet, the climb stopped instantly, and the aircraft held as if pinned in place, engines settling into idle without the expected fall. The triangle moved closer, and the pilots realized it was not the object. It was an outline, edges of something larger, dark, massive, silent, filling the forward view and erasing depth. Control returned violently during a sudden drop. At lower altitude, the aircraft stabilized and the dark mass disappeared. After landing, the physical marks were clearer. Frost again clung to wings. The nose discoloration remained. Beneath the fuselage, three parallel burn lines were scored into the paint, evenly spaced, precise as measurement marks. This time, the response did not stay inside rumor and logbooks. FAA investigator Patricia Keller confirmed the physical evidence aligned with the crew's timeline. The scorch patterns suggested thermal exposure rather than scraping, chemicals, or maintenance error. The burn lines under the belly were too uniform to be random damage, and the paint showed signs of heat applied in narrow bands. The frost samples showed unusual crystalline structure, closer to conditions the aircraft had not actually flown through. Even the heat on the nose after shutdown behaved wrong, lingering like the metal had absorbed energy and refused to give it back. What made it worse was the system-like behavior. The failures were selective, almost surgical. Radios went silent without the messy signature of interference. Digital systems became unreliable in clusters, while the analog instruments stayed stable enough to keep the crew alive. The geometry appeared inside the Aurora, then acted like a tracking tool, rotating to remain aligned with the aircraft's nose and copying altitude changes as if it was reading a live stream of the plane's state. That suggested intent, or at least a process that responded to control inputs. Grant began searching for precedent. He found a declassified military report from the 1980s describing a strikingly similar event over the North Slope. Communications loss without conventional noise, navigation anomalies, and heat-related discoloration on aircraft surfaces. Different decade, different crew, same region, same fingerprint. The corridor was not producing a new anomaly. It was repeating an old one. That changed how the story felt. It was no longer a strange night with a strange light. It became a long-running pattern embedded in that airspace. A phenomenon that could reach into a cockpit systems, reduce a modern aircraft to partial blindness, then present a geometric form that behaved with the calm precision of machinery. It did not need to chase the plane. It only needed to establish rules, force compliance, and then release control once the demonstration was complete. The official conclusion remained conservative. Unknown aerial phenomenon, possible environmental influence, unexplained equipment malfunction. The words were safe because they did not claim more than regulators could prove. Operationally, the response spoke louder. Grant McCarthy and Renee Voss were reassigned to southern routes. The Fairbanks to Barrow corridor became a place their company preferred not to test again, not because they could define the threat, but because the threat had already proven it could touch an aircraft and leave marks that survived the flight. For Grant, the last meaning was personal and cold. That route felt claimed. Not claimed by a nation or a weather system, but claimed by an intelligence or mechanism that could impose behavior on machines in midair. The frost was a signature. The heat scars were a signature. The 3 burn lines were a signature. A way of saying contact happened, and contact could happen again. Grant never saw the lines again, but the pattern stayed. He kept flying, but he watched the Aurora differently, scanning for the moment it might freeze, for the moment a perfect straightness might appear, where nature should only ripple. When other pilots mentioned radios going dead with no static, GPS jumping while analog stayed calm, sudden frost that made no sense, or heat scars on metal, Grant listened because he recognized the structure behind it. Now it turns to you. What fits better? Classified testing, rare atmospheric physics, or an intelligence imposing rules on machines in midair? If the sky signaled tomorrow, would you recognize a pattern or explain it away until it fades? Drop your theories in the comments. Subscribe for new sightings, anomalous energy readings, and the repeating patterns hiding in plain sight. This isn't just a story, it's a warning. The blast did not sound like an explosion. It looked like one. A vertical spear of electric blue punched upward from Tango 7 and turned the snowfield into daylight for a single breath. Calvin Rhodes was already running, Brooke Anders close behind, boots biting into hard drifts as the air burned cold in their lungs. When the light collapsed, the station was gone. Not broken, not burning, not scattered into debris. The antenna mast, the wind wall, the weather dome, the fuel drums, the whole footprint of human shelter simply did not exist anymore. There was only perfectly smooth snow, unmarked and untouched, as if Tango 7 had never been built. The horizon returned to darkness, and something tall remained out there watching, too many silhouettes to count before the night swallowed them again. Calvin had worked Arctic rotations long enough to believe he understood isolation. 6 years at northern research posts teaches you what darkness does to time and nerves. 3 weeks into the deep winter shift, he and Brooke were the only 2 people at Tango 7, 70 miles north of the Arctic Circle, surrounded by permanent night and temperatures that hovered around -38. He had heard older crews talk about strange lights and missing hours, the kind of stories that never survived paperwork. It was not that he had never considered the possibility. It was that he refused to believe it could be real until it reached down and shut the world off around him. Midwinter at Tango 7 meant permanent night and air cold enough to sting the lungs on every breath. Calvin Rhodes was checking the magnetometer along the eastern instrument belt when the horizon changed shape. A thin, pale yellow band appeared perfectly horizontal across the east, too straight to be aurora, too steady to be weather. It did not ripple, it did not drift. It held like a line drawn with a blade. Then a second detail surfaced above it, a dark craft shape hanging in the sky, wide and silent, with no blinking markers and no engine noise. Its underside looked smooth and featureless, except for 3 faint points of light spaced with geometric intent, dim enough to feel deliberate. The station radio died into absolute silence. Not static, not fade, just nothing, as if every frequency had been shut off at the source. Inside the station, digital displays began to blink and drop, batteries collapsing from full to empty in minutes. Outside devices refused to stay on long enough to record a frame. On a perimeter camera feed, the snowfield near the north berm briefly showed a tall figure standing upright, far too slender to be a bear, too still to be a person in wind. It was roughly 20 feet from the fence line, and it pulsed in sync with the yellow band, like the light was controlling both the sky and what stood beneath it. The feed darkened and vanished. When the systems returned hours later, the band and the craft were gone, leaving only the normal Arctic horizon. But Calvin could not shake the memory of that silent object above the line, and the impossible certainty that something had been close enough to look back before the station went blind. They did not report the light or the vertical shape. Without footage, it would become a story, and stories in a government chain become assessments, evaluations, and quiet removals. They wrote only what could be described as technical anomalies and tried to return to routine, but the station felt altered, as if the walls had become thin. During a final perimeter check, Calvin saw the snow outside the wind wall and froze. The ground held prints that were not prints. Perfect circles were pressed into the snow, each nearly 4 feet wide. They were spaced apart with no trail between them, no scuff marks, no stride marks, nothing to explain travel. The circles formed a pattern that began north of the station and curved around it in a tightening spiral. Inside each circle, the snow looked polished, smooth, not compressed, not melted, as if the surface had been finished rather than stepped on. A thermal scan showed the circles were warm, not slightly warm, warm enough to stand out like fresh metal in cold air, around 40 degrees, more than 60 degrees above ambient. There was no residual radiation and no heat source below, just warmth held in perfect geometry, a signature left behind. 3 nights later, the phenomenon returned, different but more aggressive. A deep electric blue band appeared not on the horizon but higher in the sky, angled 30 degrees, stretching north to south. It began descending. The station power failed completely. Emergency systems stayed dark. Inside, temperature climbed rapidly, heat bleeding in as if something outside was radiating into the building. Through a window, Calvin saw the blue band hovering 10 feet above the snow, tall and narrow, impossibly thin yet brighter than any flare. From that light, a tall blurred form began to emerge, not walking in, but pressing through as if the air had turned into a membrane. They fled west into open snow. Behind them, Tango 7 erupted into a column of blue light that punched upward and lit the world so hard it threw sharp shadows across the tundra. In that glare, the snowfield was crowded with motionless figures, dozens, then hundreds, tall shapes spaced out as if arranged, all facing the same direction. Then the light cut off. Where the station had stood, there was nothing. No wreckage, no crater, no scattered panels, only untouched snow, smooth as a blank page. 6 months later, Calvin and Brooke returned north, 50 miles from where Tango 7 had been erased. The tundra greeted them with geometry. Circular impressions, nearly 4 feet wide, sat in ordered patterns instead of trails. Every circle held warmth through gloves, heat sealed into the snow without meltwater. From higher ground, the layout resembled a coastline map stamped into the ice. At 3:47 a.m., all electronics died at once. Cameras went black. Satellites dropped. Screens blanked. The air thickened, and a slow vibration rose through the ground, deep and rhythmic, like a massive engine idling beneath the world. Frost crept higher along fabric seams, not from wind, but from cold that felt switched on around them. Then the gold band appeared, perfectly horizontal, suspended over the tundra like a ruler line drawn across reality. Above it, a UFO resolved out of darkness, massive and silent, swallowing starlight. Its underside was smooth and curved, with recessed points of faint light arranged in precise geometry, matching the warm circles below. A thin vertical beam dropped from the craft to the band and down to the ground, clean and pale, outlining a corridor rather than lighting it. Inside the beam, the darkness looked dense, almost glassy. Snow beneath it did not stir. Along that beam, alien figures emerged, tall and narrow, long-limbed, their edges wavering as if they were not fully solid. They did not crunch through snow and left no footprints. They appeared in positions as if placed, facing Calvin's line of sight, spaced with measured intent. Some turned their heads in smooth arcs without shifting their bodies. Their surfaces were matte and dark, with faint pulses moving beneath them like light under skin, matching the vibration in the ground. The UFO lowered slightly. The beam brightened once. The warmth inside the circles intensified, and the snow within each ring looked subtly polished, as if its surface had been restructured. One figure occupied a nearer position, close enough for shallow facial contours to be visible, eyes that did not shine yet held attention like a sensor. Meaning pressed into Calvin's mind without sound, a demand shaped like a question, followed by an answer delivered as images. Tango 7 had not been destroyed. It had been removed, pulled out of a place it did not belong, a human structure interfering with layers of reality it was never meant to occupy. Calvin stopped thinking of the Arctic as empty. He began thinking of it as occupied. The lights were not a mystery flare in the distance. The prints were not a prank. The station was not destroyed. It was erased. If you ever work under permanent night and you see a perfectly horizontal band that does not ripple, or you find warm circles pressed into snow with no trail between them, do not assume you are alone. Assume you are standing near the spaces between, and that something tall is already facing your direction, waiting to see if you look back. Erin Massey had flown Wichita to Hays so many times she could picture the route with her eyes closed. Same towers, same farmhouse lights, same quiet Kansas night that made you forget the world was big. At 10:39 p.m. she saw a light dead ahead, sitting exactly on her flight path. Too steady, too yellow, too fixed. Wichita Center said the radar was clean, no traffic, no towers at her altitude, nothing. She eased 5 degrees north to go around it. The light stayed centered in her windshield. She corrected again. It stayed centered, like it wasn't in the sky, like it was locked onto her. At a mile out, the single light split into 7, arranged in a perfect circle, rotating slowly around a core of darkness, darker than the night itself. Her radio drowned in static. The engine hiccuped once, then again, like it was choking on air that wasn't air. The 7 lights stopped rotating at the same time, and Erin understood, with a cold certainty that hit her stomach before her mind could catch up. They weren't floating there. They were waiting. A Cessna 172 is a simple aircraft, and Kansas is a simple sky. That is why the anomaly hit so hard. The light did not blink like aviation lights, did not drift like a star, and did not show on radar. It behaved as if it knew her route, her altitude, her decisions. Erin did not want to believe it was intentional, but the feeling grew anyway. Something was choosing her. Erin saw a dull yellow light dead ahead at her exact altitude. It didn't blink, didn't drift, and Wichita Center saw nothing on radar. She turned 5 degrees north to give it space. The light stayed centered in her windscreen. She turned again, still centered, like it was matching her. At 2 miles, it resolved into 7 lights in a perfect circle, rotating slowly around a center darker than the night sky. a solid disc-shaped void swallowing starlight. Her radio drowned in heavy static. Her engine coughed once, then twice. Gauges stayed normal. The 7 lights stopped rotating in the same instant, and the cockpit flooded with harsh yellow, like daylight with no shadows. Then the engine simply stopped. Clean. Total. She pushed the nose down to glide and ran the restart checklist, but nothing responded. The 7 lights slid out of formation and surrounded her, moving with her descent like an escort. She grabbed her phone to record. The screen turned pure white. A single word appeared. Activated. Ahead, the underside of the dark disk seemed to open like a doorway. For one breath, she saw a tall, thin silhouette in that opening, watching her without moving. Then everything snapped back. The disk shot straight up and vanished. The 7 lights were gone. Her radio cleared. Her engine roared to life as if nothing had happened. Erin kept flying, hands shaking, with only that one word burning in her mind. Activated. Hayes Tower cleared Erin in like any normal night. But on short final, she saw Tommy Greer's pickup by the terminal, headlights pulsing in perfect expanding circles, like a slow mechanical heartbeat. The tower said their cameras showed nothing unusual. She landed. By the time she shut down, Tommy's lights were steady again. Normal. Her phone wasn't. One photo saved at the exact time of the encounter. The image showed only empty sky and stars, but in the corner, a single word sat there like it had been stamped into reality. Activated. Tommy didn't laugh when she asked if he'd seen anything strange. His face tightened, like he'd been waiting for someone else to say it first. He told her he'd seen the same thing over a wheat field outside town. 7 yellow lights in a perfect circle, rotating slowly, then shooting straight up and vanishing. He drove her out there. In the field, a flawless 30-foot circle marked the ground. The wheat stubble inside wasn't crushed or burned, just bent at exact 90-degree angles into a spiraling pattern, too precise to be weather, too clean to be human. No footprints, no tracks, just geometry, as if something had pressed a symbol into the land and left without touching it. Back at the hotel, the fear turned sharper. Erin came out of the shower to find her phone awake on the bed, camera running, aimed at the window like an eye. She hadn't touched it. In the corner of the screen, the word appeared again. Activated. She tried to shut it off. It reopened. She wrapped the phone in a towel and locked it in the bathroom, but the feeling stayed. Not that she was being watched by people. That something in the sky had noticed her, marked her, and was still there. The next morning didn't feel new. It felt like the night had only changed its clothes. Erin woke before her alarm with a pressure behind her eyes. Her phone was on the pillow beside her head, even though she'd sealed it away. The time flickered. A calendar alert sat on the screen, impossible to delete. Runway 36, 7 a.m., do not be late. She tried everything. Delete, power off, settings, airplane mode. The alert always returned, calm and absolute, like a command that didn't need her consent. Tommy texted her to meet at the field. The crop circle was no longer just geometry. In the pre-dawn dark, the spiral faintly glowed, each bent stalk outlined with a cold bluish light, uniform and precise like a circuit traced into nature. Erin raised her phone to film. The camera app crashed instantly. Tommy showed her his phone. A GPS route had appeared by itself, coordinates northwest of Hayes, and when he tried to remove it, it reset. 2 devices, 2 people, the same invisible hand. At Hayes, the airport looked ordinary, but Erin felt watched the way you feel it in your bones. She pre-flighted the Cessna with obsessive care. Nothing wrong, nothing touched. She lifted off at 7 a.m. on runway 36. At 500 feet, her phone chimed. A new message from no sender. Maintain heading 350. Climb to 7500. Do not deviate, she obeyed. At altitude, the prairie opened below. Clean daylight. Nowhere to hide. Dead ahead, a single yellow light hovered at her level. Steady and wrong. It didn't blink. It didn't drift. It simply existed in her path like a pinned star. More text appeared. Approach at current altitude. Maintain airspeed. Her radio thickened with static, crushing every frequency at once. The air in the cockpit felt thin, charged. The yellow light grew larger until it resolved into the underside of a disc, dark enough to seem like it absorbed sunlight. Panels and seams cut across it with geometric precision. Markings ran along the surface, too structured to be damaged, too alien to be human script. Then an opening formed beneath it. It didn't hinge or unfold. It separated, as if reality was being sliced cleanly and pulled apart. A rectangular void, perfectly sized in a way that made her stomach drop. Erin tried to pull away. The yoke resisted, not jammed, simply overridden. The plane descended with gentle certainty she didn't command. The yellow glow intensified until the cockpit looked like harsh noon. Shadows vanished, depth collapsed, sound thinned. Her phone went white. One word appeared, activated, and then time fractured. Later she would swear it was only seconds, but the altitude didn't match. The clock didn't match. Her memory had holes with sharp edges. When the static cleared, the disk was gone. The sky was normal. The engine ran as if it had never stuttered. Her phone was back to normal too, except for a new photo in her camera roll. It was crystal clear. The underside of the disk in daylight, unmistakable. In the metadata, where location should be, there were only coordinates. Erin followed them. In the middle of farmland that should have been empty, she saw a facility that should not exist. White buildings arranged with sterile symmetry. A tall fence topped with razor wire. And at the center, a massive dish antenna angled toward the sky like an ear pressed to space. Whatever had activated her hadn't just shown itself. It had left a trail. And it was leading her somewhere on purpose. Activated didn't mean her phone. It meant her. The pattern is the point. Isolation first, then electronics go dead, then you're guided by instructions with no sender. Evidence shows up already curated, while time itself goes missing in a clean, measurable block your body can't explain. If Erin is telling the truth, this wasn't a warning, and it wasn't an accident. It was contact done with precision. The disk, the opening, the sphere, the erased minutes, and the switch left on inside her afterward. So here's the question. If the sky spoke to you tomorrow through missing time and a single word burned into your proof, would you call it a glitch? Or would you admit it was a message? Drop your theories in the comments. Subscribe for more sightings, missing time patterns, and the hidden signals above ordinary roads. Some disappear without leaving footprints. Others disappear by being deleted. On a clear Nevada morning, Mara Lewis watched a column of white light stab straight through the sky like a spear pinned to the earth. 34 minutes later, her aircraft data said she had not moved at all. 4 days after that, her flight coordinator, Victor Hale, was gone. Not missing, not dead, erased. Mara Lewis was 32, former Air Force, now flying contract environmental surveys along restricted edges of Nevada's test corridors. She trusted instruments the way other people trusted instinct. She trusted airspeed, fuel flow, heading, and the calm repetition of routes that never changed. Victor Hale was the ground link. He watched her telemetry, marked her waypoints, kept her on schedule, and kept her safe by being the voice that always answered. On August 14th, the sky gave Mara something that did not belong to weather or training or any human chart. At 6:45 over Waypoint Alpha, the desert looked ordinary from above. Pale ridges, dry washes, scattered scrub, the kind of landscape that hides secrets simply by being too empty to question. Then the column appeared, a vertical shaft of white light, impossibly clean, rising from the ground and continuing upward past cloud height, past blue, as if it did not stop at atmosphere at all. It did not bloom or flare like lightning. It did not diffuse like sun glare. It was precise, like geometry forced into the sky. Mara banked to confirm it was real, and the light did not shift the way a reflection would. It remained anchored to a point in the desert like a nail through a map. As she closed the distance, the ground beneath it resolved into a perfect circle, a burn scar too symmetrical to be a wildfire. About 300 feet across, scorched into a crisp boundary, as if the sand had been branded by a massive seal. The surface inside the ring looked fused, darker and glassy in places. Even from altitude, it read as heat that had been controlled, not heat that had spread. Her instruments still looked normal for a few more seconds, as if the aircraft itself was debating whether to believe what her eyes were seeing. Then the first failure hit. The radio did not degrade into static. It simply stopped like sound had been switched off. The radar blanked. The navigation display blinked once, then steadied on a frozen value that refused to update. Mara tried to turn away, a simple retreat that should have been automatic. The controls resisted, not like a jam, not like a mechanical failure, like an invisible hand had decided her heading for her. At the boundary of the light, the world began to misbehave. The air outside the windshield seemed thicker, not with weather, but with geometry. Her altimeter held, her engine held, and yet the horizon no longer shifted the way it should. It felt like the sky had been pinned in place. Then she saw them. Not reflections, not clouds. Aircraft. Dozens of them, suspended at different angles around the column like objects embedded in clear resin. A B-52 hung nose up, frozen mid-climb. A military helicopter sat tilted as if caught in a sudden gust that never finished happening. Older silhouettes hovered beside newer ones, all locked in the same impossible stillness. No contrails, no rotor blur, no motion at all. Mara's stomach dropped as the realization landed. This was not a beam in the sky. It was a trap that could hold time. She pulled the yoke and felt the response vanish. The controls did not jam mechanically. They simply stopped belonging to her. The Cessna continued forward with gentle certainty, as if guided on rails, slipping toward the center of the column. In the brief seconds before the light swallowed the cockpit, her instruments began to lie. Numbers flickered into values that could not coexist. Heading and speed remained calm while the world outside looked closer and farther at the same time. Her phone screen flashed once, not with an app, but with a blank brightness that felt like an eye-opening. And in that tightening space, Mara understood one thing with brutal clarity. Whatever held those aircraft was aware of her arrival, and it was making room. Mara never felt the aircraft enter the column. There was no jolt, no turbulence, no sense of crossing a boundary. One moment she was watching the white shaft carve the sky. The next, the cockpit was inside a brightness that didn't behave like light. It didn't illuminate, it replaced. Shadows didn't fade, they stopped existing. Sound thinned into a muffled layer. The engine vibration became distant, like a memory of motion instead of motion itself. Outside the windows was a pale emptiness threaded with faint grid lines as if the air had been printed. The suspended aircraft were closer now, and worse. Not just frozen, but collected. A B-52 hung at an angle that should have ended in catastrophe, yet it stayed pinned. A military helicopter sat motionless with rotor blades locked mid-sweep. Older silhouettes hovered too. Airframes that belonged to decades Mara knew only from manuals. They weren't floating, they were archived. Her instruments tried to argue. The GPS string kept reordering itself. The clock flickered through impossible timestamps. A warning tone repeated too steadily to be random, too clean to be failure. Then something noticed her. Not a figure, not a voice. A tension, vast and ancient, pressing against the inside of her skull like deep water. Memories opened with surgical precision. Childhood, training, the first solo, stall recovery, the smell of fuel on hot tarmac, Victor Hale's face in the control room. Each moment surfaced, turned, inspected. The pain wasn't physical. It was cognitive. Her identity tightened into a shape that could be measured. The harder she resisted, the more she sensed resistance itself being logged. A final impression branded itself into her mind. The column wasn't a beam. It was a corridor of light with faint circuitry like striations, bending where geometry shouldn't bend. The frozen aircraft weren't accidents. They were samples, held at the edge of time for as long as the intelligence chose. Then the pressure released. Mara blinked and the cockpit snapped back into ordinary physics. Blue sky, normal glare, familiar engine hum. Her hands were already locked on the yoke, knuckles white. The panel read green across the board, calm and indifferent. The logs were worse than her nerves. Flight data showed no forward movement for 34 minutes. No drift, no turn. A perfect hold at altitude, as if the plane had been pinned to a point in space. Engine parameters stayed normal the whole time. It was recorded like routine, like time had paused her and restarted without leaving fingerprints. Back on the ground, she went straight to Victor Hale. Someone had to confirm her track. Someone had to say they'd seen the gap. Instead, she found a blank space where Victor should have been. Not an empty chair. Gone. His desk didn't exist. The schedule board had no name in his slot. The staff list skipped cleanly from one coordinator to the next with no gap, no correction marks, no hint a line had been removed. Mara searched emails, flight plans, sign-offs, duty logs. The system returned nothing, not even an error. It was as if the database didn't recognize the letters in his name, and the people around her didn't react like someone had vanished. They reacted like she'd asked about a person who never worked there. Confusion, mild impatience, polite correction. Mara watched their faces and felt something colder than fear settle in her chest. This wasn't denial. It was absence engineered so completely it had rewritten the room. Only Mara still remembered Victor. That was the real proof the column wasn't just an anomaly in the sky. It could freeze machines like insects in amber. It could stop a plane without leaving a trace. And it could erase a man so thoroughly that even bureaucracy forgot how to say his name. Mara left the station with her flight log in hand and a single certainty sharpening into place. The column had let her go, but hadn't let Victor hail. Mara didn't go public. She checked the data first. 34 minutes missing. Then Victor Hale was erased. No files, no emails, no one who truly remembered him. That was the real message. The column didn't just freeze aircraft. It could delete people. 6 months later, one text slipped through, VH. 2 letters saying he still existed somewhere, time couldn't reach. If reality can erase a person, the only defense is to make the story too widespread to erase. What would you do if someone vanished and everyone swore they never existed? Drop your theories in the comments. Subscribe for more. In the Central Valley, night usually settles like dust. Jade Carrion knew that darkness well. Harvest season teaches you the logic of orchards, pump lights, distant traffic, honest shadows. That is why the line shook her so fast. It didn't flash into view, it was just there, suspended above the citrus canopy, a pale blue stroke, perfectly straight, perfectly still. No source, no spill, no shadow on the leaves below. It looked less like light and more like a mark someone had drawn across the world. The longer she watched, the more her body reacted. First, a low vibration she felt in her chest, then a sense the air had thickened around that strip of sky. The orchard stayed familiar, but the space beneath the line felt controlled, like an invisible rule was being enforced. She raised her phone to document it. The camera refused to focus, as if reality itself didn't want a record. Jade managed a 180-acre orange ranch outside Visalia. October meant long days and late nights, irrigation checks, and a routine so familiar it felt safe. She had thought the valley's darkness was empty. She was wrong. Jade stayed late to check irrigation in the North 40. The grove was empty, rows of orange trees turning into dark tunnels, only the occasional click of a valve breaking the quiet. She saw the blue line because it made the air feel split. It hovered above the canopy, perfectly straight and level, stretching across multiple rows like a ruler had been dragged through the night. It didn't spill light onto leaves, didn't cast shadows, didn't flicker. It just existed, clean-edged and unreal. A low vibration settled into her chest, more felt than heard, steady like a machine holding a constant note. Jade lifted her phone to record. The camera refused to lock onto it, snapping focus to branches and back to darkness, leaving the line as a smear on the screen. She tried again, same result. When she lowered the phone, the line was still razor-sharp to her eyes. No glow on the ground beneath it, no mark, just normal soil and fallen leaves under something that shouldn't be there. She backed away slowly, keeping it in sight. The vibration stayed calm and unchanged, as if she'd stepped into the edge of a monitored zone, and whatever drew that line had no urgency at all. She called Reagan, her husband, to come back to the grove. When he arrived, he didn't speak at first, just stared up, then stepped under the blue line like he was testing an invisible boundary. The change was immediate. The air didn't get colder so much as wrong. Sound thinned, like the orchard had been wrapped in glass. The hum sank deeper into Jade's ribs until it stopped feeling like noise and started feeling like pressure. They called CHP. The dispatcher didn't ask follow-up questions, didn't sound curious, just ran a script and ended the call too cleanly. Then the valley reacted anyway. Up on Highway 99, traffic bunched and stopped in uneven clusters. People stepped out and looked up in the same direction, quiet in the same way. And above the asphalt, more lines had appeared, not beams, not lasers, but perfect pale blue strokes suspended in the air, holding their place like a measurement drawn onto the sky. Jade stared long enough to notice the spacing. Parallel, precise, not random. A few cars tried to inch forward under them. Most didn't. Because the moment the first car rolled too close, brake lights rippled down the line like the whole road had flinched. And Jade knew, with a certainty she couldn't justify. The lines weren't just being seen, they were seeing back. Jade did not go home after Highway 99. She took back roads, like she could outrun the feeling that the lines had noticed her noticing them. At a stop sign, her phone buzzed from a number with no history. Don't stand under it. Don't look for the source. They log attention. She typed, "Who is this?" and hit send. The message vanished from the thread as if she never wrote it. Another ping followed. If you go back, go analog. No cloud, no live, no GPS. Back at the ranch office, she pulled up irrigation data and soil temps, trying to force the night into something measurable. Most of it looked normal, except one sensor map that showed a razor-straight discontinuity across 3 zones, like the orchard had been cut by an invisible ruler. One side was colder, not just at the trees, but in the air above them. She grabbed old-school gear from the office drawer in her truck, an AM radio, a compass, a cheap analog watch, a disposable film camera, and a notepad. She turned her phone off anyway and drove back to North 40. The orchard was too quiet, not peaceful, sterile. The AM radio caught a repeating tone under the static, slow and heavy, like it was vibrating inside her ribs. The compass needle twitched, then tugged toward the deeper rows. Halfway in, she crossed an invisible threshold. One step was normal night air. The next step felt thinner, pressured, electrically wrong. Then the blue line appeared again above the treetops, 6 inches wide, perfectly straight. It did not glow like a lamp. It looked like the air itself had been colored. Her flashlight did nothing to it. She raised the disposable camera and clicked. The moment did not feel captured. It felt refused. She clicked again, just to prove to herself she could. The line did the impossible. It relocated without moving. One blink, it spanned one gap. Next blink, it spanned a different gap yards away. No slide, no sweep. Just a new placement, like the scene had been edited between frames. Her truck was behind her, her phone was off. It vibrated anyway. She ran back, yanked it from the glove box, and the screen was already awake. No lock screen, no passcode. A single command sat there. Marker 23, County Road 168. Now, come alone. At marker 23, the air felt heavy, storm-like without wind. Her headlights washed over an empty field, and yet her brain kept insisting there was mass out there that light refused to define. Then her eyes adjusted. A compact object sat low in the field, warping the air around it. Not huge, not cinematic, deliberate. Parked like it did not fear discovery. Beside it stood a tall silhouette, narrow torso, long limbs, head shape wrong in a way her mind could not label. It did not sway, it did not fidget, it simply waited. Her phone brightened. Text appeared as if placed there. You are early in the change. Then meaning arrived inside her head, not words. Not threat, not warning. Assessment. A flash of an image hit her, the Central Valley from above, crisscrossed by pale blue lines, a grid laid over human space like measuring tape over skin. She understood the point with sick clarity. Attention was the signal. Her phone showed one more line. Don't try to keep proof. Keep yourself. The silhouette stepped forward once. No footfall, no crunch of dirt, just a shift, like a cursor moving on a screen. Her analog watch made a single loud click. The world dimmed for a breath, headlights, stars, the edge of the field, like someone lowered the exposure on reality. Then the night returned. The object was gone. The silhouette was gone. Marker 23 was just marker 23. The wind came back in a soft gust that felt almost staged. Jade sat in her truck shaking, staring at her hands to convince herself they were still her own. On the passenger seat, the disposable camera lay exactly where she had dropped it. The film counter had advanced by 3 frames. Jade remembered taking one shot. Jade won't describe what happened between 3 and 3:17 a.m. Not because she's hiding it, because the memory won't stay sharp. But one thing is clear. Those blue lines didn't act like random lights. They acted like a grid. And a grid isn't there to scare you, it's there to measure. 3 weeks later, Reagan starts forgetting details. Jade doesn't. Her last note is simple. They didn't erase the story. They chose who could still remember it. And then, she goes quiet. If you saw the line tonight, would you record it, run, or go back? Comment. Record, run, return. Night in the Rockies. The cab is the only warm box of light for miles. Jackson grips the wheel as the road ahead looks edited, like someone erased the depth from the world and left only a flat strip of asphalt in its place. The beams from his truck still blaze, yet they stop short in midair, as if the darkness has weight. Then a pressure settles over the roof, not wind, not weather, something vast and deliberate. The engine sound thins into a hollow hum, every gauge steady but meaningless, and the air inside the cab turns metallic and sharp. Jackson lifts his eyes to the windshield and realizes he is not approaching the anomaly. It is approaching him. October 2019, Colorado. The stretch from Grand Junction toward Gunnison is the kind of road that feels empty even when you are not alone. Just black mountains, cold air, and the hum of a diesel engine trying to keep you anchored to reality. Jackson had 15 years behind the wheel. He knew the difference between fear and imagination. That night, the road taught him a third thing. The line ran parallel to the highway, bright but sourceless, not blinking like aircraft lights, not shimmering like reflection, just a clean, glowing stroke suspended in open air. Jackson slowed. Mary leaned forward, trying to make sense of it, trying to film it. The phone struggled to lock focus, hunting the darkness, refusing the line like it did not want to be recorded. Then the headlights failed in the strangest way. The bulbs still burned. The dashboard still glowed, but the beam would not reach the road. It stacked up in front of the grill, flat and useless, as if the night had turned solid. The truck shuddered and died. A hard cut of silence. No wind through mirrors, no engine vibration, just their breathing. Seconds later, everything returned at once. Engine, radio, normal light. Jackson drove on, trying to laugh it off. 10 minutes later, Mary checked the GPS. Same coordinates, same mile marker, same distance to Gunnison, still locked at 38 to 40 miles like the road had reset. They passed signs they had already passed. They saw a reflector that felt familiar, then impossible. Jackson kept driving anyway, because stopping made it feel worse. The line returned. This time it did not float beside the road. It stretched across the highway ahead, widening into a pale tear in the dark. The air around it looked wrong, like heat shimmer without heat. Jackson did the only thing his instincts could agree on. He put his foot down and drove straight through. The moment the truck crossed the seam, the pressure in their ears released. The GPS jumped forward. The next sign finally changed. The road began behaving like a road again. 3 months later, Jackson had to take Highway 50 again, daylight this time, alone. He told himself daylight meant safety. It did not. Midway through the run, he saw a woman in a white dress standing on the shoulder. No coat, no bag, no car nearby. Just her, perfectly still as if placed there. As he approached, the details broke. Her eyes sat too far apart. Her mouth looked too wide. Her skin had the waxy calm of a store mannequin trying to imitate a human being. Jackson stared, caught between braking and fleeing. The truck passed her, and she turned to follow him. Not like a person, like a display on a rotating stand. A smooth mechanical pivot that kept her face tracking the cab until Jackson could no longer see her in the mirror. Then Jackson felt it, that prickling certainty you get when you are being measured. Not watched casually, watched with purpose. A thought slid in, quiet and cold, not in words, but in meaning. We know you. Jackson told himself it was just a weird roadside moment. Then his CB radio hissed, one thin line of static, clean and steady, like a tone. No voice, no chatter, just a single frequency that didn't belong. A mile later, the world started to thin out. Not visually. Colorado still looked like Colorado, but sound became too clean. The tire noise dulled, like someone lowered the volume on the universe. Even the vibration through the wheel felt filtered. Jackson glanced at the clock. The digits looked normal, but the seconds didn't tick. So much as hold, like time was deciding whether to move. Then his headlights did something impossible in broad daylight. They were on, bright, normal, and yet the beam hit the air ahead and stopped, flattened against an invisible surface just beyond the hood, as if the light couldn't move forward. Jackson whispered, no. He eased off the gas, instinct, then tried to correct back into the lane. The steering didn't resist, it wasn't stiff. It felt like the road had become a track and the truck was no longer his. And then the engine shut down, not a cough, not a sputter, a clean surgical cut. RPM dropped to 0, the hum vanished. The cab became a sealed box of silence. He coasted to the shoulder, hands shaking, trying the ignition. Nothing. The dash stayed lit, but the lights looked wrong. Too steady, too perfect, like a screenshot of a dashboard rather than a living system. Jackson looked down at his phone on the seat. The screen was awake. One word sat there as if it had always been waiting. Stay. He didn't remember unlocking it. He didn't remember anyone typing it. And then he saw the shadow. It wasn't cast by clouds. It didn't match the sun's angle. It slid over the road in a shape that shouldn't exist. A triangle, wide enough to swallow his rig. Jackson forced himself to look up. A black triangular craft hung above Highway 50, low, silent, with 3 faint points of light at its corners. No seams, no detail. It didn't reflect sunlight so much as refuse it. The air changed, cold pressure behind the eyes, a metallic bite like ozone. From the center underside, something unfolded. Not a spotlight, but a hard-edged column of pale light, as straight as a doorway drawn into the air. Dust stopped drifting, and inside that column a figure resolved, tall, thin, with limbs that bent the wrong way, joints stacked where joints shouldn't be. It didn't walk down. It simply became present on the asphalt as if distance had been folded. Jackson's throat locked. He couldn't scream. Then the contact arrived, not through sound, but straight into his head, sharp and emotionless. Seen. A second pulse followed, images that weren't his choice, the white hovering line from months ago, the GPS loop, the moment reality tore across the road. And then, the woman in the white dress, now not standing at the shoulder but standing inside his memory like a bookmark, the same wrong face, the same fixed attention. Another thought pressed in, colder. Watcher, lure, alignment confirmed. The figure lifted a long hand and touched the truck's window. The fingers were too long, too many bends. The gesture wasn't threatening, it was testing, like learning what glass is. Jackson tried to move, his body didn't respond. Not paralysis, something worse. Like his impulse had nowhere to go. Then the final thought landed, heavy as a verdict. Marked, continued. Sound snapped back, wind, distant traffic. The creak of the cab, the column of light was gone. The triangle was gone. The phone screen returned to normal like it had never shown anything. The engine restarted by itself. Jackson sat there breathing hard, staring at empty sky, knowing the scariest part wasn't the shutdown. It was how precisely it had all been timed. As if the roadside woman wasn't random. She was a trigger, a sign that the next stage had begun. That night he checked his dashcam. The file list jumped from 2:13 p.m. to 2:29 p.m. 16 minutes missing. The gap wasn't a corrupted file. It was cleanly removed, as if somebody had highlighted a strip of time and cut it out. 2 days later, a plain envelope appeared in his mailbox. No stamp, no return address. Inside, a single photo, taken from high above Highway 50 in daylight, his rig on the shoulder, and above it, unmistakable, the black triangle hanging perfectly centered. At the bottom, one line, "You were seen." And Jackson finally understood what the woman's stare had been. Not curiosity, not warning, a handoff. Jackson says the worst part wasn't the craft. It was the feeling that Highway 50 had turned into a checkpoint and he'd been processed. Because you can explain a blackout, you can explain a GPS loop, but you can't explain a photo taken from above your truck when you never saw anything up there. So tell me, if it happened to you, would you keep driving or would you vanish first? The basement dispatch room in Santa Rosa is so quiet, Leona Ward can hear the fluorescent lights breathing. Then the clock flips to 2:11 a.m., and every line on her console lights up at once. Not one caller, not two, all of them. Static floods her headset, thick, wet-sounding interference like the desert itself is trying to talk through a dead radio. Voices break in and out, a man screaming, a child crying, a woman praying, then all of it collapses into a single, impossible silence. Leona leans closer to the screen, waiting for coordinates to populate. They don't. And then, without sound, without a phone line, a word lands inside her mind, cold and command-like, as if it's being read directly into her thoughts. Return. Leona has worked 911 dispatch for 12 years in a town so small it feels like a dot on the map. Santa Rosa, New Mexico, a stop along Route 54, a black ribbon of highway slicing through open desert. Her night shift runs midnight to 8 a.m. Most hours are nothing. Lonely motorists, stray animals, the occasional drunk who can't find the motel. Out here, the desert keeps its own schedule, and for reasons Leona can't explain, it started calling her at 2:11 a.m. Firstly, Leona answers a call drowned in thick static, like the signal is being squeezed. The man says his name is Michael Valdez. He's on Route 54, alone in the desert. He's terrified, not because something is following him, but because it's matching him. A cluster of bright lights holding steady distance, too clean, too steady, with no aircraft blink pattern. Then his voice tightens. Radio died, GPS died, phone's glitching, only 911 still connects. Leona tries to locate him. The system returns nothing, no coordinates, no map pin, like the call isn't coming from anywhere real. Michael says the road feels wrong, like he's driving into dense air. He swears he passed the same reflector post twice. The static swells and his voice warps for a second, still his but stretched thin. "It's not behind me anymore," he whispers. Leona asks where it is. A pause, in front, like it's waiting. He describes a perfect white line suspended in the air, too straight to be natural, hanging across the dark. And inside the glare, he says he can see figures, not shadows, more like silhouettes behind a veil, shifting when the light shifts. A low hum rises under the static. Michael starts to shout, "It's coming down," and the call cuts off mid-breath, clean and instant. Leona refreshes the archive. There's no recording, no normal log entry, only a corrupted 8-second file of pure static. PD patrols Route 54, no gray Honda, no skid marks, nothing. Later, they confirms Michael is home, confused, insisting he never went out. His car sits in the driveway, dust-caked, untouched. Leona can't forget the one impossible detail. Out there, whatever was happening, 911 was the only thing that could still hear him. 3 weeks later, Leona is back on the night shift, watching the clock slide toward 2:11 a.m. The line hits with that abrasive static, thicker than noise, like pressure. A woman gasps out her name, Sarah Baker. She's on Route 54, mile 265, and something is following her. Her GPS is frozen, her dash glitches, and yet somehow 911 still connects. Leona pings the call, her console answers with a blank field, as if Sarah is speaking from a place the map can't name. Sarah describes a light that isn't headlights, red-white pulses, steady as a heartbeat, hovering too high for any vehicle. Then her voice tightens. "My steering wheel's going stiff, like it's being held. The static swells." Sarah whispers that the brightness is opening like a seam, and inside it she can see tall, thin shapes stepping out, too long-limbed, too precise, as if they're copying how a person moves. Leona orders her to stop, lock the doors, stay inside. Sarah inhales sharply. "It's in front of me." There's a white click. The call ends cleanly. Leona checks the logs. No recording, no proper entry. Just another gap. Patrol sweeps Route 54 and finds nothing. Later, another department confirms Sarah is home asleep, her car parked outside, no memory of leaving. Leona stares at the empty file slot, because now she's sure of one thing. Whatever owns 211 is learning. 3 weeks after Sarah's call, Leona stops trusting quiet. 2:11 a.m. All of it breaks. Not one call, several slamming into the console at once. Different lines, different voices, same panic threaded through them like a shared current. A man is yelling over wind and static that doesn't sound like weather. "Mile 277, Route 54, we're stopped." He isn't saying we pulled over. He's saying we were made still. Behind his voice, a chorus, women crying, a kid screaming for someone to wake up, a car horn stuck down and then cutting off as if the sound itself was unplugged. Leona tries to pin the calls down. Anything, tower, cell path, a hint of location. The screen doesn't fail. It behaves perfectly, smooth and blank, like it's politely refusing to admit the calls exist. Then the man's voice rises into a raw, disbelieving shout. "It's right above us. It's a triangle." The word, triangle, is all she gets before the line distorts into something thick and metallic, like a radio chewing on a magnet. In the distortion, another voice appears, not frantic, not human, not even through the speaker, more like it's being laid over the room. Leona's ears ring, her teeth ache. The air in the basement turns dense, as if the desert has pressed its face against the building. And then a single word arrives inside her mind, with no sound attached to it. Not heard, not imagined. Placed. Return. Leona's hand goes cold on the desk. She stares at the console like it might start bleeding. She tries to breathe, but the word sits in her chest like a weight that doesn't belong to her. The calls cut off together. No fade, no click, just gone. Minutes later, the first patrol unit reaches mile 277. When the officer radios in, his voice is controlled in that way that means he's forcing it. 5 vehicles, all on the shoulder and partway into the lane. Hazard lights on, engines running. Leona grips the edge of her desk. No occupants, he continues. Doors open on 2, phones on seats. One car has a kid's shoe, just one. Her stomach drops. He adds something quieter, like he doesn't want the desert to overhear him. There are marks on the road, 3 circles, burned down to the aggregate, placed like someone measured it. Leona writes it down anyway, because writing is the only thing that makes it feel real. 3 burns. Triangle. No skid marks. No signs of a struggle. No footprints leading away. Just 5 running cars and 12 missing people, as if they were removed from the scene the way a hand lifts pieces off a board. Leona realizes 211 isn't a time the way normal people mean it. It's a doorway. She tries to quit after that, tells herself it's over, tells herself she can't be the person who sits in a basement while the highway steals families, but the number follows her. On the microwave when she wakes too early, on the gas pump when she refuses to look up, on her car clock drifting to 211 as if it's being gently corrected. Then, months later, she's back on nights. Not because she wants to be, because some part of her needs to know if the desert will do it again. Needs to know if that word return was a warning or an instruction. One shift, the phone never rings at all. No incoming lines. No radio chatter. No wind noise through the vents. The basement becomes so still it feels staged. Leona sits there with her headset on, listening to nothing, and starts to understand what being watched actually means. Not a gaze, but a presence arranging the world around you. At 211, her monitors flicker just once. Not a power surge, not a glitch, a blink. And then, without sound, without language, without any place for it to travel from, a message settles into her mind with the calm certainty of something that has done this many times before. We heard you. Soon, you will hear us. Leona doesn't scream. That's the worst part. She just sits there, frozen, because she knows what comes next is not another missing car. It's not another distressed caller. It's the moment the thing on Route 54 stops using the highway as a hunting ground and starts using her. What makes Route 54 terrifying isn't the triangle, it's 211, a repeatable timestamp like something learning the same doorway. The calls carry panic, not location, as if where doesn't matter. Devices don't fail naturally, they get quietly overridden. The word return doesn't warn, it commands. Mile 277 feels less like an incident and more like a demonstration. And we heard you. Soon you will hear us isn't an ending, it's a countdown. If your phone rang at 2:11 a.m. and the voice sounded almost human, would you hang up or listen? Tell me in the comments, have you ever had a time that kept following you? What was it? The truck vanished in an instant. The lane went empty like it had never been there. And when Grant checked his watch, he realized 15 minutes of his night had been cut out cleanly. The only thing left behind was Sierra Mays' final video frame, her face drowned in blue light inside a cab that looked completely empty to the naked eye. At 2:17 a.m. on a Tuesday in October, Officer Grant Reich is running patrol on Highway 207, roughly 30 miles from the Oklahoma line, a flat stretch of Texas Panhandle where the darkness feels wide and the road noise is usually honest. Then his headlights catch a full-size 18-wheeler stopped dead in the northbound lane, with no hazard lights, no flares, no reflective triangles, just a heavy shape planted in the middle of the road like it has been placed there to be found. Grant pulls behind it, angles his cruiser lights for visibility, and expects the usual: a groggy driver, a mechanical failure, maybe a medical event. But the first detail that unsettles him is the total absence of human reaction, because no cab light turns on and no door opens and no silhouette moves behind the glass. Grant approaches with his flashlight and sees the truck is locked tight, the mirrors still, the windshield dark, and when he checks the cab and the sleeper area through the windows, he sees only empty seats and empty bunks and a dashboard that looks powered down. Then he radios dispatch for the owner information and hears a reply that bends the moment into something stranger, because the registered operator, Sierra Mays, is on the phone right now, and she is reporting that she is inside the cab. She can see the police lights, but she cannot see any officer walking toward her truck. And she is asking why no one is opening the door. Grant asks dispatch to patch Sierra through directly, and when he hears her voice, it is not distant or unclear. It is immediate and frightened, and she says she has been sitting there for 20 to 30 minutes after deciding to pull over because the air inside the cab suddenly felt heavy and the road ahead seemed to ripple. Then she says she watched the cruiser arrive and stop behind her, yet the side mirror shows no one exiting. He asks Sierra to describe the cab, and she says there is a blue electronic light flooding the space without casting shadow, a glow that feels like it is coming from every surface at once, and from nowhere at all. And as she speaks, Grant looks at the truck with his own eyes and sees no blue glow on the glass and no spill on the asphalt. But when she agrees to switch to a video call, the screen in Grant's hand shows Sierra sitting upright in the driver's seat with her face washed in that blue light, her hands shaking on the steering wheel, her eyes tracking the flashing police lights outside, and the impossible contradiction locks into place, because the video shows a living person trapped in the cab while his direct view through the window shows an empty seat. Then the time slip appears, because Sierra tells him her clock reads 1:37 a.m., while Grant's cruiser clock has already rolled to 2:31 a.m., and she insists she has not been stopped long. Yet Grant checks her location history through dispatch and sees the GPS ping has been stationary far longer than she believes, more than an hour and a half, and as the call continues, the video stutters in tiny jumps, not like poor reception, but like frames being removed. And each stutter briefly sharpens the blue glow into geometric bands that crawl across the ceiling and down the window frames, as if the light is scanning the cabin. Grant decides the contradiction ends only when he gets the door open, so he moves back to the driver's side lock with his entry tool. And as he sets the metal against the seam, the wind around the highway drops out as if someone has turned off the atmosphere, leaving a silence so complete that even dust in his cruiser lights seems to stop drifting, and the quiet feels pressurized, as if the world is holding its breath. His radio clicks once, then a voice comes through that is not Sierra and not dispatch, a voice with a strange cadence and a tone that never fully settles into any familiar accent, and it speaks as if reading from a rule book that does not care about his authority, telling him to step away, telling him that the civilian is not in his vehicle, telling him that the civilian is here. Grant freezes, because his body understands before his mind can organize it, and on the phone, Sierra begins to cry harder and says the blue light is thickening. She can feel it on her skin like static, and behind her in the video, the sleeper curtain lifts slightly, even though nothing moves it, revealing a deeper darkness that looks too deep for the small space. And then Grant forces his hands to move again and applies pressure to the lock. The moment the tool bites, the entire truck disappears without sound or displacement. No tire marks, no oil smell, no fading engine heat, just an empty strip of highway that makes his flashlight beam feel suddenly useless. And Grant staggers backward into the void of space where 40,000 pounds of metal had been, and his radio hisses into silence. When the wind returns, Grant checks his watch and sees 15 minutes have vanished, and his cruiser dashcam shows a gap in footage that begins at the instant the air went still, as if the road itself refused to be recorded. And in the empty lane, his headlights reveal nothing but clean asphalt. Yet on the phone, the call has dropped, and dispatch is calling his unit name with rising urgency, as if he has been gone longer than he can account for. In the days that follow, Grant tries to file a report that fits inside policy language, but every sentence collapses under its own contradiction, because the truck was present and absent at the same time, because the occupant was visible only through a screen, because time peeled away 15 minutes in a single breath. And the more he repeats the facts, the more he feels that voice on the radio was not warning him, it was classifying him. A few nights later, he receives a quiet invitation to a support group in Amarillo, and in a small room filled with folding chairs and paper cups, Grant hears his story reflected back through other mouths. Ranchers, mechanics, a volunteer firefighter, a dispatcher, all describing blue light with no shadow, absolute stillness in the air, and the feeling of being observed from angles that should not exist. The frequency is increasing across the panhandle, that vehicles return days or weeks later with electrical systems dead as if something drained them through the wiring. That paint and plastic show signs of intense ultraviolet exposure, and that lab tests on scraped residue have revealed metal isotopes that do not match known terrestrial ratios. Those who tried to shoot the light or force their way through it suffered brain injury, lost speech, or woke with language stripped out of their mouths as if the mechanism that took them could also remove the tool they used to describe it. Grant leaves that meeting with an unspoken certainty that Sierra is not an isolated case. She is an example, and the alien presence is using the highway as a controlled environment, placing paradox in the road to see who will approach and who will remember. 16 days later, Grant returns to Highway 207 before dawn, and the blue light blooms over the asphalt with no shadow, flattening distance until the road looks mapped by faint geometric grids. Then his radio turns on by itself, and the same non-human cadence states, "Sierra Mays is alive, preserved, and under study, and she will be returned when the study is complete." And his dash screen flashes a single frozen frame of Sierra's face lit in blue before collapsing into static. The voice tells Grant he has been marked because he saw and retained the memory, and that his role is to carry the account. And he drives away understanding the highway is not a place anymore. It is a channel that can store people like data. If Sierra can exist on video while the cab stays empty, what is the corridor actually moving? Share your theory, then hit like and subscribe. What kind of light can melt a perfect circle in snow without registering as heat, shut down a diesel tanker's entire electrical system except the headlights, and then carve symbols into glass that never fade even after the ice is gone? And if those same symbols later appear pulsing inside an oil pipeline like coded coordinates, who exactly is trying to communicate through the storm? 3 weeks after the Dalton Road incident, Gideon Merrick walked the pipeline corridor with a thermal camera and a checklist mindset, expecting nothing but cold gradients and ordinary faults. Yet he carried a single detail from a driver's report that would not leave him alone. An orange light that did not behave like fire and symbols that survived ice. The corridor around him felt too quiet for open Alaska, and his CB scan picked up short rhythmic bursts that sounded less like interference and more like something testing the channel. Gideon's thermal display found the first anomaly before his eyes did, a clean orange point hovering about 3 feet above the snow, perfectly defined and unaffected by wind-driven flakes, and directly beneath it, the snow had melted into a flawless circle, yet the thermal readout showed no heat source at all. He moved closer and watched the circle widen by a few inches in a smooth, perfect ring, as if the snow was following an instruction rather than melting, and his headset filled with a low tone that he felt in his teeth and ribs more than he heard. More orange points appeared in mirrored pairs along the right-of-way, spaced with deliberate regularity. Then 6 lights assembled into a pentagon above the pipeline and began rotating with slow certainty, and the low tone deepened into a pressure that made Gideon's stomach tighten. He raised the camera and saw the points brighten in sequence like a scan. Then the lights lowered until they hovered just above the steel, and the impossible part was how the steel reacted. Because the orange did not flare or burn, it seeped, sliding into the metal surface as if the pipeline had become permeable. As the orange sank into the line, dim pulses ignited along the pipe in a repeating cadence, a chain of faint orange nodes blinking like a message traveling through steel. And Gideon realized he was not watching a phenomenon. He was watching a process. He scraped a small metal sample from a site where the glow had concentrated, and the fragment felt warmer than it should in that cold. Then the pulses marched onward in groups, pausing, repeating, then shifting, like a code that expected to be read. That was when Gideon contacted Jude Rasson, the diesel driver whose report had started circulating through the corridor crews. And Jude agreed to meet only because the symbols were still etched into his windshield. still visible at certain angles as if the glass had been engraved by frost itself. Jude described a whiteout night at -32 Celsius when orange lights formed a corridor along the road. His engine died while his headlights stayed bright, and a tall, thin figure stepped out of an orange door and wrote numbers into instant fractal ice on his windshield with a hand that had too many finger lengths. And Jude's timeline did not add up afterward, 4 hours missing on a stretch that should have taken 90 minutes. Gideon did not need to believe every detail to recognize the pattern, because Jude's etched symbols matched the grouping rhythm of the pulses Gideon had just filmed. As if the corridor had written the same language on glass first, then upgraded to steel. Gideon brought his thermal stills and the scraped metal sample to Jude Rassin, and one look at Jude's etched windshield was enough, because the clusters matched the pipeline pulse cadence in the same pauses and repeats. They drove to a safe pullout near the corridor to test whether the lights reacted to attention, and the moment they stopped, Gideon's thermal display found clean orange points hovering 3 feet above snow with perfect edges, unaffected by wind. Then more points appeared in mirrored pairs like posts placed on a ruler, and the air inside the cab felt pressurized without sound, the kind of silence that makes teeth ache. When Gideon raised the camera, one point drifted sideways to stay aligned with the cab as if locking on, and Jude's etched symbols caught the headlights and looked briefly deeper, as if the grooves were filling with faint orange from inside the glass. Then a thin, fractal edge of frost formed along the lines even though the cabin heat was running, and Gideon realized the corridor could rewrite water and light on demand. The pipeline in Gideon's thermal view began to answer, dim pulses igniting along the steel in the same grouped cadence, traveling in runs, pausing, repeating, then shifting as if correcting itself. And when Gideon held the metal sample near the window, the fragment warmed in his glove, and the camera showed a faint orange response inside it, like the corridor could address the material directly even after removal. The dash lights dipped in the same beat as the pulses and the orange points outside, and the CB channel opened by itself, carrying a thin layered cadence under the hum, not words, a measured counting that returned Gideon's own breathing a fraction of a second late, as if the radio had become a mirror. Then the nearest orange point brightened, and the snow beyond it stopped swirling for a heartbeat, and a tall vertical absence appeared where the storm should have been, a narrow, darker shape that did not blur in wind-driven flakes. And as it moved closer without stepping, the cabin temperature dropped in a single clean notch. Jude turned toward the empty passenger seat as if someone had just sat down, and Gideon saw a second outline in the passenger window reflection, too tall and too thin to be either man, positioned exactly where an unseen observer would stand. Then the etched symbols on the windshield flared once in faint orange, and the fractal frost traced outward like a diagram being completed. Gideon tried to speak, and his voice died in his throat, while the CB cadence paused as if waiting for input, then resumed with a slightly different rhythm, and Jude's hand froze on the ignition when the engine coughed once and went silent, while the headlight stayed bright and steady like a held breath. Gideon kept filming with shaking hands until the thermal screen bloomed white, not overexposure, but a clean blank field, and in that blank Jude's silhouette and Gideon's silhouette appeared twice, offset by inches, as if the cab had two versions of the same moment layered together. Then the orange points outside collapsed inward, like they were being pulled into a single coordinate. After that, the record breaks, because Gideon's camera file ends mid-frame. Jude's dash clock later shows a jump that neither of them can explain, and the only new thing left behind is a fresh thin line etched into the glass beside the old symbols, a line that looks like a direction, and a final CB burst that repeats 3 beats, then silence. If the orange lights can melt perfect circles without heat and write persistent symbols into both glass and steel, then they are manipulating matter through rules that do not require fire, and if their code points to weak spots in the pipeline, then the entities may be caretakers trying to prevent a disaster, or they may be rehearsing control by practicing on infrastructure first before they practice on people. Gideon keeps walking the corridor with a camera and a growing dread that the next message will not be about the pipeline at all. Are the entities protecting the wilderness or protecting their own route through it? Tell me what you think happened down there, and if you want the next case, please hit like and subscribe. What kind of light refuses to cast any shadow in fog? What kind of encounter deletes 32 minutes cleanly? And why did Hannah quit after hearing silence speak? Marcus Calloway worked WS. Nights for 11 steady years. He patrolled Highway 20 through the North Cascades darkness. He trusted culverts, chains, radios, and winter procedure. Halloween 2021 brought thick fog near mile marker 108. He and rookie Hannah Westfield checked drains beside the road. The forest felt muted, like it was holding its breath. Fog swallowed the slope near mile marker 108. Marcus saw blue light through the trees. Hannah assumed a flare. Marcus felt it was watching them. The glow stayed fixed as fog moved. It left no spill on wet leaves. It left no reflection on puddles. That absence made Marcus uneasy. They climbed carefully with flashlights held low. Boots slid on needles and slick moss. The air smelled metallic and cold. The forest sounded quieter than snow. The sphere appeared between trunks, perfectly centered. It hovered at chest height, motionless. It was about 3 feet wide. Its edge looked clean, almost drawn. Marcus aimed his beam at the sphere. The beam curved around it. The fog behind stayed unchanged. No shadow formed anywhere. Hannah stepped closer and stopped breathing. Her radio clicked once, then died. Marcus heard a thin hum in teeth. It felt like pressure without sound. The sphere pulsed brighter, then dimmer. Faint geometric lines appeared in fog. The lines formed a grid, then vanished. Marcus saw the hillside overlaid with other moments. He saw summer ferns replace winter needles. He saw charred trunks, then fresh saplings. He saw future headlights cutting new asphalt. Hannah whispered someone stood behind it. Marcus saw a tall, thin outline in fog. It moved without steps, then dissolved. The sphere remained patient and close. Marcus tried speaking, but words felt delayed. His watch froze on 1 minute. The truck lights down slope looked farther away. The sphere pulsed again, stronger now. A thought pushed into his mind. It showed caves under the mountain, glowing faintly. It showed slender figures moving in silence. Hannah grabbed Marcus and pulled hard. Her glove brushed fog beside the sphere. The air felt colder, like water. Her fingers went numb instantly. They backed downhill, never turning away. The hum followed them like an escort. The grid flickered once on Marcus's lens. They reached the truck and slammed doors. The cab clock jumped forward 32 minutes. Marcus checked logs and found a clean gap. Hannah stared into fog and started crying. Marcus hunted answers off duty, staying off station radios. He pulled night logs from sheds and old depots. Some pages were missing, yet staples stayed. Inked call signs were scrubbed into gray bruises. The gaps felt intentional, not sloppy bureaucracy. He found a recurring symbol in margin doodles. It looked like a triangle made of dots. Different hands drew it, years apart. Each time it sat near water-related notes, culverts, runoff ditches, creek bends, and spring seeps. The pattern felt like a warning, not folklore. Marcus drove Highway 20 alone and waited inside fog. The air grew heavy near a rock cut. His dash clock paused, then jumped 2 minutes. A pale blue shimmer rose over the ditch. It hovered without reflecting on wet asphalt. His flashlight beam bent, then wrapped around nothing. The shimmer pulsed and the forest went unnaturally quiet. Marcus heard a soft cadence under static, like counting. His radio lit up without transmitting any voice. The speaker returned his breathing, delayed by a beat. Frost formed fractal lines across his windshield edge. The lines traced angles, then locked into a grid. A tall, thin outline appeared inside the headlight glare. It moved without stepping across the ditch. Its shape stayed sharp inside drifting fog. Marcus saw long fingers touch nothing. Then air rippled. The grid on glass brightened, then vanished at once. His phone camera saved only black frames. Marcus backed away, never turning from the shimmer. The blue point followed, staying aligned with his cab. The engine stumbled, then steadied without his touch. The dash lights dipped in a synchronized beat. The cadence on radio paused, as if listening. Then it resumed with a new rhythm. Marcus returned home and found mud on boots, still frozen. His GPS history showed a route he never drove. A new waypoint sat over a creek bend. The label used his own typing style. Marcus understood the boundary, could write back. Marcus returned with Hannah, despite her earlier resignation papers. She said closure required one last drive. They chose November 21st before closures worsened. Fog clung to trees near mile marker 115. The ditch water ran thin and black. 3 blue spheres appeared, forming a perfect triangle. The triangle held steady without drift. No shadow formed beneath any sphere. The air felt heavy and close. Their truck electronics died in one clean drop. The dash went dark, then stayed dark. Hannah's phone went black, then stayed black. GPS froze on a blank coordinate. Only the headlights stayed bright and steady. One sphere drifted closer, silent and smooth. It stopped beside the hood, perfectly centered. Marcus felt pressure behind his eyes. Hannah clutched her chest, breathing shallow and fast. A thought arrived without words or sound. Marcus saw 10,000 years of seasons. He saw glaciers retreat and forests return. He saw ancient fires, then silent regrowth. He saw hot vents under rock glowing faintly. Hannah whispered she saw someone inside the fog. Marcus saw deep thermal caves under ridgelines. He saw tall, slender figures in chambers. Their limbs looked too long for humans. Their eyes looked dark and unblinking. The spheres showed water channels under the highway. They showed culverts as access points. They showed drilling biting deep rock. They showed collapsed chambers and poisoned springs. Hannah tried to speak into the radio. The radio opened itself instead. A thin cadence came through, measured and close. It sounded like counting, then correcting. The cadence synced with the triangle's slow rotation. Fog around the spheres formed faint geometric seams. The seams connected into a grid for seconds. The grid slid across the windshield glass. It aligned with old etched frost lines. Hannah pressed her palm to the window. Frost fractals formed under her fingers instantly. Her hand stayed against the glass, unmoving. A tall, slender figure appeared beyond the ditch. It was not fully visible in fog. It looked like absence shaped into a body. It moved without stepping, then stopped. Marcus raised his flashlight toward it. The beam curved around empty air again. The figure lifted a hand with long fingers. The triangle tightened, shrinking its spacing slightly. The nearest sphere brightened like a signal marker. Hannah's breath fogged the glass, then stopped. Marcus called her name, but sound felt swallowed. Her outline blurred, then doubled in the headlight glare. For one heartbeat, 2 Hannahs overlapped. Then the passenger seat was empty. The seatbelt lay buckled, still warm. A blizzard hit without warning, drowning the road. A huge geometric structure settled onto the highway. Its edges looked sharp, then soft, then sharp. The structure hovered without sound or wind. The humanoid figure stepped out beside it. It stood tall and slender in blowing snow. It had long fingers with narrow joints. Its eyes looked black and almond-shaped. It did not speak with a moving mouth. The warning arrived inside Marcus's thoughts. We are not invaders. We live here. Respect this boundary or consequences follow. The figure raised one hand toward the forest. The spheres flashed once, then dimmed. Marcus saw ridgelines mapped in faint light. He saw triangle marks pulsing along drainage lines. Then everything shut down at once. The structure lifted without sound or wind. The spheres folded into one point and vanished. The blizzard noise returned in a rush. Marcus drove back alone, hands shaking on the wheel. He could not recall the next 10 miles. Hannah never clocked in again after that night. Her resignation file stayed unsigned, then vanished. Dispatch logs showed her truck never left the yard. Yet Marcus remembered her voice beside him. Marcus filed no report and kept private night logs. He searched ditches and culvert mouths at dawn. He found no tracks, no dropped gear, no answers. The boundary felt open, and it felt personal now. Did the spheres take Hannah, or copy her out of time? Tell me your theory, then hit like and subscribe. He filmed the brightest thing he ever saw on I-40. The playback showed only empty asphalt and dark sky. Then a voice arrived inside his thoughts, calmly. Jasper Mitchell was 24, working security for remote oil sites. He drove between pump stations during long night patrols. Uinta Basin nights felt empty, yet never truly quiet. Headlights cut dust, and radios filled the cab with hiss. Then one Tuesday in October 2019, a sensor went dead. Control asked Jasper to check well 14 in the north sector. 3 miles out, the wind stopped as if switched off. Air pressure dropped and his ears popped inside the cab. The desert sound vanished, leaving only engine vibration. Jasper realized the basin could silence him on command. Well 14 sat alone under black silence. Jasper stopped at the access road, engine idling. The desert felt sealed and the stars looked dim. A white light hovered 40 feet above the pump jack. Its edge stayed razor clean, wrapped in a faint blue rim. It cast no shadow on dirt, steel, or Jasper's hood. Jasper filmed through the windshield, yet every clip saved pure black. The real light still burned behind his eyelids. His camera lens frosted, then cleared without heat. The blue rim flickered, like sparks holding perfect shape. A low hum rose through boots and into teeth. His chest tightened, as if air folded inward. The light jumped sideways without traveling, like frames were cut. Each jump hit his ribs with one hard internal shove. Under the light, a tall, slender outline formed beside metal. Long fingers moved in slow arcs, never touching the pump. The outline turned toward Jasper, and the hum deepened. Jasper stepped out, and the ground felt colder than air. Ozone stung his nose sharp and clean. The light shot upward and vanished, leaving no trail. He checked panels, expecting scorch marks or melted wiring. Everything looked untouched, yet the sensor signal returned. No alarm logs remained, as if nothing happened. On the hill, a faint blue point lingered, then winked out. Jasper drove away, feeling watched by the empty ridgeline. 2 weeks later, well 9 went silent, and Jasper drove alone. Fog pooled low, yet the basin stayed unnaturally windless. A white sphere hovered above the wellhead, shadowless and steady. Its blue rim crackled, but no heat rose from it. Jasper recorded again, speaking timestamps to prove what he saw. Playback showed only his cab, bright dashboards, and empty windows. Outside, the light kept pulsing, like breath behind frosted glass. Each pulse pressed his chest, then released, then pressed again. The hum returned, deeper now, vibrating the steering wheel. The sphere jumped twice, snapping to new angles without motion. 3 smaller lights blinked in, forming a tight triangle above it. The triangle rotated once, then stopped, perfectly centered over piping. Under the lights, a tall, slender figure appeared beside the pump. Its head looked elongated, and eyes looked black and almond-shaped. Long fingers hovered over valves, never touching metal, yet gauges changed. Pressure spikes flickered on his panel, then normalized instantly. The well's alarm light flashed, then the log erased itself. Jasper watched numbers rewrite, like someone editing a report live. He started mapping every sighting from other guards and crews. Reports clustered between wells 4 and 37, with harsh precision. They followed groundwater lines, uranium claims, and rare mineral seams. Some nights showed arcs of lights, swapping positions above ridgelines. Those swaps matched chest pressure pulses on every witness statement. One crew reported a silver shape sliding low beyond the berm. Another saw figures working inside a luminous ground structure. Jasper began suspecting resource surveys, not random hauntings. He felt counted, like each well was a numbered checkpoint. He kept routes secret, yet the lights found him anyway. On December 18th, Jasper patrolled the north sector alone. At 2:47 a.m., every pump stopped together. That should have required a master cut. 8 white lights appeared across the basin at once. Each hovered above a different wellhead. They held perfect spacing and moved in formation. Jasper's engine died mid-road without warning. His phone froze on 2:47 a.m., refusing to change. The hum returned, deeper and heavier. The lights swapped positions without traveling between points. Each swap pressed his chest inward once. The basin felt compressed, then released, then compressed again. A silver shape slid low beyond a berm, soundless. It looked bus-sized and seam-free. Jasper saw it pause beside well 22. Tall figures moved around the silver shape, smooth and efficient. Their bodies looked too narrow for any human. Their heads looked elongated under the white glow. Their eyes looked black and almond-shaped. Their skin looked pale gray with a wet sheen. Long fingers flexed with narrow-jointed segments. They never touched steel, yet valves turned anyway. Gauges spiked, then returned to normal instantly. Jasper tried recording with his phone again. The screen showed only his cab and black windows. Outside, the lights pulsed like breathing lungs. The hum matched the pulses beating through his ribs. Then one figure turned toward Jasper's headlights. Jasper felt a thought arrive, cold and clinical. It showed wells as dots and roads as thin lines. It showed Jasper's truck as a moving mark. The thought shifted and the mark moved without him. Jasper blinked and saw 2 trucks ahead. Both looked like Unit 14, identical in dust. Both drove the same line, perfectly aligned. Jasper looked down and saw his wheel unmoving. His truck was not moving, yet scenery shifted. The lights rose together and vanished. Sound returned in a rushing wave. The pumps restarted by themselves seconds later. Jasper checked his phone again, now 3:14 a.m. 27 minutes were missing from his memory. Dispatch called him and spoke very carefully. It said never report lights on open channels. It said the basin keeps records in silence. Jasper drove back shaking, trying to breathe. Jasper quit and moved to Price, Utah within days. He avoided oil roads and night work. The white light still appeared behind ridgelines sometimes. It stayed low, patient, and perfectly still. Jasper began seeing himself in reflections too often. A second Jasper stood across parking lots, watching. The double wore similar clothes and moved smoothly. Its eyes looked empty and too still. Its voice sounded layered, like many speakers. Jasper fled to Provo, then farther north. The light followed at a constant distance. Road signs seemed to change after he passed them. GPS routes looped back without reason. He felt guided, not chased by the light. His phone rang once from an unknown number. Only static answered, then the hum. A text appeared with no sender name. It read, "Do not look at it." The screen then went black. Before dawn, Jasper drove toward Salt Lake City again. The white point sat behind him in the mirror. Another set of headlights appeared beside it, steady. The second car kept matching his speed exactly. Jasper glanced left and saw his own face driving. The double smiled without warmth, then looked forward. Jasper's chest pressure returned in steady pulses. The road ahead looked longer, then suddenly shorter. His cracked phone buzzed with one final message. It said, "See you soon," then went dead. The hum rose under the tires, then inside teeth. Jasper reached the next exit, then saw it again. The odometer blurred, then snapped back. The mirror showed only darkness behind him. Jasper's dash clock froze on 1 minute again. At sunrise, his truck was found off Highway 6. The engine block was still warm. The driver door hung open, swinging slowly. His phone lay inside, screen shattered and dark. There were no footprints around the truck. No tire marks led away from it. His last log entry ended mid-sentence. No one filed a missing person report that week. Work rosters showed Jasper still scheduled. His payroll direct deposit continued for 1 cycle. Messages sent to his number never delivered. The basin stayed silent, as if satisfied. Jasper feared the lights, but feared silence more. He learned denial can be enforced quietly. He watched coworkers ignore impossible failures without blinking. Then Jasper vanished, leaving only a warm truck. If a doublekin heard you, who arrives afterward? Was Jasper removed, replaced, or archived somewhere nearby? Drop your theory below, then like and subscribe for more cases. A dead zone lasted 47 minutes on radar. Dustin lived 3 missing hours instead. Something tall and faceless waited beside the spheres. Dustin ran long-haul routes between Las Vegas and Reno. He carried construction loads and kept night schedules. On June 17, 2020, dispatch sent him a shortcut. The route skirted the Tonopah test range in open desert. He reached Goldfield around 10 that night. The air felt wrong before he saw anything. The radio crackle thinned, then dropped into dead silence. 2 white lights hovered ahead, low above the roadway. They were not headlights, and they cast no shadows. As he approached, his phone lost signal instantly. His radio died, and even static disappeared. The lights resolved into 2 spheres, floating 3 meters high. Each sphere held a faint blue rim, steady and sharp. Cabin temperature dropped fast, biting through his jacket. Frost filmed the inside glass in thin sheets. The diesel engine cut off by itself, without a sputter. Absolute silence filled the cab, heavy and pressurized. A low hum rose through the seat and into his teeth. Dustin felt his chest tighten in slow pulses. In the dim glow, a tall, slender figure stepped forward. Its limbs looked too long and too narrow. Its face seemed smooth with no clear features. It moved with steady efficiency, never rushing. Another figure appeared behind it, then another. They held position beside the spheres, like a line. Dustin could not move. not even his hands. His eyes stayed open, yet his body refused. The spheres brightened once, then dimmed again. The nearest figure reached the driver door and stopped. Long fingers hovered near the handle without touching. Then the light snapped off as if switched. The engine restarted by itself, idling smoothly. Wind returned in a sudden rush outside. The frost on glass melted too quickly, leaving streaks. Dustin drove hard toward Tonopah without looking back. At a station, he checked the clock and receipts. Almost 3 hours were missing from his memory. 2 weeks later, Dustin returned with cameras and spare batteries. He reached the same shoulder at 10:52 p.m. The air went still before any light appeared. 2 spheres formed above the asphalt, perfectly aligned. They looked larger now, and oddly faceted. Their skin swallowed headlight glare, leaving no reflection. A blue rim held steady, sharp, and silent. The hum returned and pressed behind his eyes. Frost crawled along vents and across the steering wheel. Tall figures stood beside the spheres, arranged like sentries. They were thin, too tall, and motionless at first. One stepped forward with long, jointed fingers. Its face looked smooth, without features, yet somehow watching. A voice entered his mind, cold and measured. "Do not move, you are being observed." His hands clenched, yet his arms felt far away. The figure raised a hand toward the windshield. Ice flowered instantly into geometric fractals across the glass. A fingertip traced symbols through the frost, without pressure. Dustin filmed, keeping his face visible in frame. Every file saved black, with clean gaps in the audio. Even the clip timestamps jumped forward in uneven steps. When the spheres blinked out, the frost vanished too quickly. Dustin drove hard until Tonopah lights appeared. At dawn, an envelope waited under his wiper blade. Inside were radar scope prints from June 17. His truck track entered a hollow, then vanished completely. The hollow lasted exactly 47 minutes on the chart. Receipts still showed nearly 3 missing hours that night. A note warned, "Do not ask for names here." Another line read, "Reports now arrive 3 times weekly." One print showed faint returns circling the hollow edge. They folded into a triangle, then into a tight ring. A month later, Dustin drove the shortcut again after midnight. The air went still near the same mile stretch. Temperature dropped fast inside the cab. The engine died cleanly, without any struggle. 2 spheres appeared first, then 4 more. They formed a wide arc around the truck. Tall figures stepped from the dim glow quietly. More figures followed, lining the shoulder and median. They were thin, too tall, and perfectly balanced. Their heads were elongated and smooth. Their eyes were black and almond-shaped. Their skin looked pale gray with a matte, wet sheen. Long fingers flexed with narrow-jointed segments. They moved with smooth, efficient precision. One figure stood in the lane, centered in headlights. It raised a hand, and Dustin stopped breathing. The hum pressed into his ribs in steady pulses. Frost flowered again across the windshield in fractal geometry. Symbols formed within the frost, drawn by hovering fingertips. A voice entered his mind, cold and exact. "You are marked, you will remember." The figure stepped closer without footfalls. They surrounded the cab like a quiet ring. Dustin watched a finger point at his chest. Another finger pointed at his throat. Another finger pointed at his forehead. The spheres brightened once, then dimmed to a low glow. The dashboard clock froze, then jumped ahead in blocks. Dustin woke at a rest stop, shaking hard. 6 hours were missing from receipts and device logs. His cab smelled like ozone and cold metal. His tongue tasted like pennies for hours. The hum lingered behind his eyes all day. A quiet research circle found him through trucker channels. They asked for his receipts and dash logs. They shared reports and symptom lists in plain envelopes. They warned him to avoid mirrors after encounters. Many witnesses had headaches, tinnitus, and memory gaps afterward. Some had triangular scars in mirrored placement. Some heard tones in teeth for weeks. Some saw doubles in reflective glass. One man forgot his own address for days. During a 4th encounter, 6 spheres formed a ring over desert ground. The ring opened like an iris, without any sound. 5 or 6 entities appeared inside the opening. They stood taller than before, with longer arms. Their fingers fanned wider, counting invisible measures. A sequence of images hit Dustin without warning. He saw grids of roads and moving vehicles. He saw human faces fading into blank calm. He saw a boundary folding between places. The entities sent one clear concept into his mind. Time is ending, Choices required. The hum became a heavy pressure, then weightlessness. 2 days later, Dustin woke in a Las Vegas hospital. He remembered a beam and a falling sensation. Doctors found fine white dust in his clothes. His phone held black frames and broken time codes. After that, encounters stopped for 6 months. Then Nevada lost power statewide for 47 minutes. Darkness hit like a curtain across every ridge. The hum returned inside Dustin's teeth immediately. 2 white spheres appeared above his street, shadowless. Streetlights stayed dark, yet shadows moved across his driveway. A sphere hovered above the roofline, pulsing like a slow heartbeat. Frost formed geometric petals on his windows, then vanished. The air smelled of ozone and wet stone. Tall figures stood between parked cars, perfectly still. A cold voice entered his mind, calm and final. The choice is now. His phone lit up, showing 10:52 p.m. again. The time display blinked, then froze on the same minute. A tall figure stood at the porch steps facing inward. Its long fingers traced symbols in air above the railing. Those symbols glowed briefly, then sank into the wood grain. A second figure appeared behind it, matching his height exactly. Its face looked blank, yet familiar in the porch glass. Dustin tried to shout, but his voice stayed trapped. Neighbors later reported his porch light blinking without power. A door camera saved only black frames that night. Inside the cab, the hum rose until his vision shimmered. He later remembered weightlessness and a metallic taste. When power returned, Dustin was gone. His truck sat idling in the driveway, warm. The driver door hung open, swinging slowly. No footprints marked the dust outside. Only a thin line of white dust crossed porch boards. It ended at the door, then continued inside the cab. His steering wheel felt cold, despite the warm engine. The radio hissed a tone, then spoke his name once. His receipts folder lay on the seat, neatly stacked. The tone matched the hum from desert nights. His mailbox held a new envelope, sealed without glue. Inside was a single black frame printed on paper. It showed his porch, empty, with a sphere above. The last note inside read 47, then stopped. Dustin kept every receipt, gap, and black file in one box. After the blackout, that box was all that remained. No one proved he lived or died afterward. The number 47 stayed behind like a signature. If they can take a driver from his own porch, what does the choice actually mean for us? Comment your theory, then like and subscribe for the next case. A faceless alien blocked the canyon trail and watched Elliot run. White UFO spheres split above the crazy mountains in perfect geometry. Patricia screamed for help, but the voice moved without a body. Elliot served search and rescue in the crazy mountains for 8 years. He carried ropes, radios, and trauma kits through brutal weather. He knew panic, injuries, and bad luck on cliffs. Nothing matched the call about Patricia Romano, age 53. She vanished during a cold November hike. Elliot deployed with Mara, a veteran rescuer. They expected exposure and confusion, not non-human hunters. Search and rescue called Elliot at dusk. Patricia Romano vanished near Crazy Mountains. Elliot drove in with Mara, headlamps cutting fog. Cold wind dragged across pines like whispering cloth. Patricia's boot prints led north between rocks and snow crust. The trail narrowed into a dead valley. A woman's plea echoed from ahead. The words sounded flat, like a recorded loop. The voice jumped farther in seconds. No human could move that fast. Elliot called Patricia's name and heard it echoed back. The echo matched his tone, but felt wrong. Mara stopped and listened, tense and pale. The valley felt staged, like a trap waiting patiently. Air pressure dropped and Elliot's ears rang hard. A white UFO sphere hovered above the treetops. It descended straight down, silent and steady. Elliot's GPS died and his compass spun wildly. His watch froze at 4:47 p.m. The sphere split into dozens of smaller spheres. They formed clean geometric rows over the valley. A fake helicopter thump started, then cut off. Faceless aliens appeared along the trail, evenly spaced. One alien blocked the path, arms too long. Its smooth face had no features, only black eyes. It copied Mara's voice, begging from behind them. Another copied Patricia's voice, crying from farther ahead. The aliens did not chase, yet distance felt stolen. Elliot and Mara climbed toward a rock ledge. Below, more aliens moved under spheres like stage lights. The spheres pulsed together, matching the hum inside Elliot's ribs. Elliot looked down and saw a staged formation, perfectly rehearsed. When they reached the ridge, the valley light was gone. The UFO spheres vanished, like someone flipped a switch. The faceless aliens vanished too, leaving blank snowfields. Wind slammed back into pines with a sudden roar. Snow began falling again, loud and painfully normal. Elliot checked his watch and felt nausea rise. 3 hours were missing from his shift log and memory. His legs still burned from climbing through frozen scree. Mara said her last minutes felt cut from film. She remembered pulses, black eyes, and a humming corridor. She could not recall the final climb to safety. Elliot remembered an alien watching, closer than his headlamp. He also remembered the scream moving, never losing breath. Their radios now played static with a slow breathing rhythm. The ridge camera showed only darkness, despite clear moonlight. At daylight, Mara returned anyway, driven by missing time. Elliot stayed above, scanning for spheres in open sky. Mara found geometric cuts in dirt, stone, and crusted snow. The shapes repeated circles, angles, and nested lines. Near a dry creek, she found a dull metal shard. It stayed cold in sunlight, like it rejected heat. She bagged it, and her phone screen flickered blue. Every photo saved then turned into white static instantly. Video files became black frames with skipping timestamps. Her compass pointed downhill, then spun, then died. The recorded scream returned again, flat, empty, and precise. It jumped from cliff to tree within seconds. A fake helicopter thump began, then stopped mid-beat. White spheres reappeared briefly, forming a grid above her. Faceless aliens stood between trunks, watching her without blinking. Mara ran out, and the valley looked normal behind her. Elliot understood the valley wanted rescuers, not lost hikers. It wanted witnesses it could edit, erase, and replace. They returned with stronger radios and brighter floodlights. Air pressure dropped again. Elliot's ears rang hard. White UFO spheres appeared above both ridges. More spheres split off in silence. They formed a perfect grid overhead. The grid rotated above the valley. Each sphere pulsed every 3 seconds. Faceless aliens stood along the slopes. They were evenly spaced and silent. Their blank faces swallowed light. Several lifted long arms and pointed downhill. Patricia's scream returned without breath. The scream jumped farther within seconds. A helicopter thump started. It stopped mid-beat. The spheres pulsed together again. The hum pressed into Elliot's teeth. Mara moved first, drawn by the moving scream. Elliot followed, watching the grid tighten overhead. Snow stopped falling inside the valley bowl. Breath fog thinned, then vanished in cold air. His compass spun, then pointed straight down. His GPS rebooted with impossible coordinates. Radio hiss carried slow breathing between static bursts. Faceless aliens appeared between trees. They vanished without sound. They reappeared closer with no footprints. A second scream copied Mara's voice. It switched to Patricia's voice mid-word. Elliot heard footsteps that never touched snow. The ridgeline aliens watched without turning. Mara found a cave entrance masked by loose rock. The tunnel felt polished and unnaturally smooth. Glowing symbols crawled along walls in repeating grids. The symbols blinked in 3-second cycles. Dark cables ran through stone in branching paths. Small spheres drifted ahead. They lit paths without shadows. Faceless aliens stood in alcoves, still and upright. Some carried pulsing orbs the size of fists. The orbs blinked with Elliot's breathing rhythm. One alien raised 3 fingers. The symbols brightened instantly. Another alien turned its head. The hum changed pitch immediately. Elliot felt the ceiling press lower. Patricia lay deeper inside, alive and shaking. Her eyes fixed on empty air. Parallel marks lined her wrists in perfect pairs. A metal door opened silently into a bright chamber. Mara lay on a metal table, unmoving and pale. Glowing tracks ran along her skin in precise geometry. Faceless aliens surrounded her, hands hovering, never touching. One alien faced Elliot. The hum sharpened into a drilling tone. Another copied Patricia's voice from the corridor. The copied voice begged softly. Then it laughed in the same tone. A sphere hovered above Mara, pulsing as a timer. Symbols covered the walls, then wiped clean. Mara's glowing lines flared once, then dimmed. Elliot grabbed Patricia and ran into darkness. Distance stretched around them. The floor felt longer each step. A doorway of light opened ahead. It folded shut again. Frost flowered on the walls. It vanished instantly. Elliot climbed through a ceiling break with Patricia. They surfaced under stars, far from the valley mouth. Mara was not with them. They were 5 miles away. No trail led back. The live feed saved only black frames. Patricia stared past Elliot's shoulder. She covered her ears at static. Her hands trembled, then went still. Elliot called Mara on every channel. Only hiss answered. Mara's phone pinged once at midnight. The ping came from the valley. At dawn, her truck sat unlocked. The cab was empty. 3 days later, Mara reappeared at her porch. She stood motionless and barefoot. Thin lines glowed under her skin. She would not speak. Her eyes tracked something unseen. Cameras filled with white noise nightly. The next morning, her front door swung open. Mara was gone again. No footprints marked snow. Elliot prepared a final return alone. He split his stream to servers in 3 states. White spheres rose from trees at shoulder height. Faceless aliens formed a line across his path. One alien touched his lens with 3 fingers. Symbols flashed across glass. They sank into blackness. The grid tightened overhead. It closed without any sound. His stream froze on white static everywhere at once. After that, only humming remained inside Elliot's files. Elliot entered the valley again as a witness, not prey. The live stream ran for 13 minutes. White spheres appeared above him and split into a grid. Faceless aliens stepped into frame and surrounded him silently. Then the feed froze on white static and never returned. Was the valley a trap, a lab, or a border gate? Did Elliot save truth or trade himself for it? Tell your theory below, then like and subscribe for the next case. At 1:15, a UFO hovered over the north fence. An alien silhouette crossed the warehouse roof in orange light. All 16 cameras went blank as the hum filled the yard. David had guarded government sites for 19 years. He held high clearance and signed too many NDAs. He worked a lone night shift north of Tonopah. The facility stored prototypes and sealed aerospace hardware. He knew questions earned punishment, not answers. Then the protocols started, before he understood why. At 1:15, Camera 7 turned blank without warning. The other feeds followed, one by one, then all at once. Every monitor showed empty black, yet status stayed green. David refreshed the system twice and got the same nothing. A low hum started inside the walls, then underfoot. The air felt heavier, like the room was pressurized. He stepped outside into cold desert air and fine dust. Camera 7 was intact, but aimed straight down. Its mount was tight, like someone adjusted it carefully. Yard floodlights flickered, then shifted into dull orange. Beyond the north fence, a dark oval hovered against stars. 2 smaller lights flanked it, perfectly even. Another light blinked once, then duplicated into 3. The 3 lights formed a shallow arc and held position. They slid sideways without any travel path. A second arc appeared farther east, mirroring the first. David heard no engines, only the hum, steady and deep. The fence wires trembled once, then went perfectly still. His flashlight died in 1 beat, battery reading full. His phone shut off at 80%, then stayed dead. Orange light rolled across metal walls like heat without warmth. On the warehouse roof, an alien silhouette crossed fast and precise. A second alien shape followed, taller, thinner, angular. They moved like joints were hinges, not muscle. One paused at the roof edge and looked down. Another stood beside it, then vanished between frames. Above the roofline, the dark oval lowered a few feet and held steady over the fence. Smaller UFO lights rotated around it in a clean ring and pulsed in a 3-beat pattern. The hum matched those beats, like coded breathing. A low sphere drifted over the yard near the floodlights and cast no shadow. It passed a camera pole, and the pole went dark. Another sphere mirrored it on the far side, keeping perfect spacing. Then the roofline flashed with a thin blue seam. For a second, more aliens stood there in a row, heads turning together toward the yard gate. The seam closed and the roof looked empty again. The orange lights stayed on, waiting. David rushed back inside and shut the office door. The monitors stayed black, yet every status icon stayed green. He opened the event log and saw no faults. The timestamps jumped, then corrected themselves. The hum pressed harder, like a second heartbeat. He grabbed the landline and called command 40 miles south. A calm voice answered on the first ring. It asked for his unit code, not his name. David reported the orange lights and the blank feeds. The voice did not ask for repeats. It said a sweep team was already moving. It told him to keep logging everything. It warned him not to chase anything outside. David returned to the yard and kept moving slowly. He watched the roof through window reflections and metal panels. In reflection, two aliens stood at the roof edge. A third alien appeared between them, then flickered out, their limbs bent at sharp angles like jointed tools. A low sphere drifted along the fence and stopped. Another sphere mirrored it, keeping perfect distance. Each sphere pulsed once, and a camera pole died. The dark oval UFO above the fence stayed perfectly centered. Smaller lights rotated around it in a tight ring. The ring tightened, then loosened, like a breathing machine. The hum matched that motion and filled his ribs. The orange floodlights blinked in 3-beat patterns. One alien raised a hand and held a precise sign. The ring lights answered with the same 3-beat pulse. David felt his thoughts slow, then snap back. He kept his eyes on reflections and kept walking. The warehouse roof became a stage of orange light. A tall alien silhouette stood at the edge, rigid. Its body looked built from angles, not muscle. Limbs hung too long, joints narrow and sharply defined. Another alien appeared beside it without any approach. It simply occupied the space, then shifted aside. Their heads turned together, matching timing like a metronome. The roofline flashed with a thin blue seam. For one blink, more aliens stood inside that seam. They lined up like figures in a doorway. The seam closed, and they vanished again. Above the north fence, a dark oval UFO lowered and stopped. It held position with absolute steadiness, ignoring wind and gravity. Smaller lights rotated around it in a perfect ring. The ring tightened, then loosened like controlled breathing. Each light pulsed in a 3-beat pattern. A second oval appeared farther east, smaller but identical. Its ring formed instantly, matching the first ring rhythm. The two rings synced, then drifted sideways together. They shifted without any visible travel path. A third light blinked above them, then split into 6. Those 6 formed a clean hex around the first oval. Low spheres moved through the yard at shoulder height. They crossed floodlights, and the glow deepened orange. They passed camera poles, and each pole went dark. The spheres never cast shadows on gravel or steel. They stopped at measured points along the perimeter. Each stop mirrored another stop across the yard. The hum thickened and added faint clicking beneath it. The clicking sounded like counting, steady and patient. Thin beams flickered down, then vanished before touching ground. Where beams aimed, the gravel looked briefly wet and glassy. The tall alien crouched at the roof edge and dropped. It fell without sound, as if gravity was muted. It met the ground with no dust, no impact, no rebound. It moved into darkness, then appeared closer by position change. A thinner alien crossed behind it, fast and precise. The two separated and rejoined as if following a grid. One raised a long hand and folded fingers into a sign. The ring lights answered with the same pattern in pulses. A nearby sphere drifted toward the office windows and stopped. It held perfectly still, like it was listening. A blue seam opened again along the roofline and stayed open. Inside it, silhouettes looked layered, like stacked depth. Aliens stood at different distances, yet aligned in one row. The seam brightened, and the hum shifted pitch. For a moment, the two oval UFOs aligned nose to nose. Then they separated without motion or sound. Their rings rotated opposite directions, then stopped in sync. A faint geometric lattice appeared between the ovals. The lattice pulsed once, then folded inward and vanished. Then every sphere pulsed at the same instant. The ring lights flashed in a clean sequence, left to right. The roof seam closed like a cut stitched shut. Aliens on the ground blurred, then snapped into new positions. The two ovals rose together and drifted beyond the fence. Smaller lights followed in tight formation, never breaking spacing. The orange glow faded back toward harsh white. The hum lingered thin and patient, as if it stayed nearby. David stayed on shift, but something in him broke. He kept hearing the hum inside quiet rooms. Orange light followed him behind closed eyelids. He stopped trusting screens, then stopped trusting silence. Each blank camera frame felt like a warning. He checked corners twice, then checked them again. Sleep came in fragments, always ending at 1:15. He woke tasting metal, with static in his ears. 3 weeks later, he requested a transfer without explanation. He never spoke about Tanopa to anyone at work. He only wrote one line in his private notebook. They can erase feeds, but they cannot erase memory. So what did the UFOs want from that facility? Drop your theory below, then like and subscribe.